People who enter homes for a living, maintenance, cable contractors, etc. What's the strangest thing you've encountered when entering someone's home? I'm a code enforcement officer for my city, and recently I responded to a complaint about a house that had dead rats all over the outside, and according to the complaint, it was so bad, you could see rats crawling in the yard, and through the windows. We get a lot of people complaining about rats, and rarely is it an actual rat problem. Usually, it's just mice. I had already issued orders on this house for something else, and had been in contact with the owner. When I went to speak with her previously, I was nearly knocked off the porch by the smell on her, but I couldn't see anything inside the house, and I can't write a violation notice on a person's hygiene. Well, I went back to investigate to claim of dead rats outside in the yard, and sure enough, there are at least 4 of them just in the front yard. Based on this, the smell, and complaints from the neighbors and even a police officer, I probably could have obtained a search warrant, but I decided to contact the owner and see if she would let me in. I had asked once, and she said no, but it was worth a shot. When I called her, she said that she was having a problem with her roommate and wasn't spending much time there anymore. She asked if I could do anything to help get him out of the house. I told her that I couldn't help her evict anyone, but if the sanitary conditions inside were as bad as I suspected, my inspection might result in him being vacated. I asked what the inside of the house was like, and she said that the floors in the kitchen were just bad and needed to be replaced. But still she agreed to let me in. A few days later, I showed up with my supervisor and a city police officer. Her roommate had a violent criminal record. We go inside, partially at the roommate's request, because he had the nerve to call in a complaint on her, and find a house that I now call the Jumanji house, because it looks like we interrupted a game. The rat infestation was so bad, I observed multiple of them running around. One even brushed past my boot. Anyone who knows about vermin and pests can attest to the fact that an infestation has to be very bad to even see one in the daytime. The carpets and floor were covered in rat droppings and dog sheet. The floor in the kitchen was indeed bad, so bad that they had to move the fridge into the living room to stop it from sinking into the basement. At one point, the roommate was showing us around, and as he entered one of the bedrooms, he stopped short and looked at us and said, "Oh, this looks bad." My supervisor and I just looked at each other, wondering what the hell could be in there that was any worse than the rest of the house. Perhaps a portal to hell. It was just a freshly killed rat on a dresser that he hadn't yet tossed out the window. Yeah, we vacated them immediately. I've done residential maintenance in the past. Seen some faked up shit here and there. A few exhibitionists, plenty of filthy/stinky tenants. Some people's plumbing backed up, and it looked like their bathtub was filled with refried beans. The thing that sticks out the most was this small studio apartment on the 3rd floor of this building. The smell. Oh my fucking god, that smell. I can't even describe it other than it made me never want to smell anything again, as long as I lived. In the kitchenette there was some brown substance running down all of the cabinets. The dirty dishes looked like they'd been sitting there for centuries. The bathroom appeared as though someone had explosive diarrhea and just stood in the doorway as facing the toilet and let go a faking shotgun blast out of their asshole that resulted in what the great philosopher Michael Jackson would call voodoo fezzes thrown all over the walls. Next to the bed there were some gnarly fingernail clippings next to a jumbo tub of Vaseline and a Men's Fitness magazine. I'm not a small man. I had my 300 pounders doing all the running from the 3rd floor down the truck to get tools/materials that we needed to get the fuck out of that sliver of hell on earth as soon as possible without having to spend much time inside of there. It was by far the most disgusting place I'd ever been in. We reported it to the property manager and the person was evicted. I can only imagine he was severely mentally ill. Since I'm not at work anymore, I figured I'd give describing the smell a go. It was like an amalgam of sheet, piss, cum, sweat and sour milk. It was by far the most unpleasant smell I have ever perceived. I can't believe this nasty faking story is the most karma I've gotten in my ridiculous career thus far. I'm not the one entering homes, but we recently underwent renovations at my family home. When I was 18, my parents commissioned a painting for me that was meant to showcase my love for a certain video game series. It's tradition to get a portrait done. When we hit 18 in my family, the painting turned horrifically, a very realistic version of my face plastered on an anime style body next to the main character of the series, who was also in an anime style. It was based off of key art from the series. Worst of all, this painting is like 1.5 meters tall and hanging on the wall that is immediately facing the door. I can't take it down, lest I offend my parents, as they don't think it looks that bad. I'm pretty sure I scarred the guy for life. That, or he thinks I'm obsessed / in love with a cartoon point edit. Screw it, since you guys keep asking, here's the monstrosity itself. What's worse is that it hangs above a good chunk of my collection. Figures, games, collector's editions, mangas, plushes etc. So this genuinely looks like a shrine. I was doing home inspections for a FEMA contractor in Texas and had made an appointment for an inspection through a third party because the guy wouldn't receive phone calls from unknown numbers. The friend I spoke with assured me that the property was not an abandoned warehouse and that the guy lived in the part that used to be a dojo. A time was set point. I arrived at the crumbling building and knock on the open door. I can see that it is packed to the ceiling with boxes full of stuff. The entire place had flooded about 5 inches, enough to make everything soggy and moldy. This was weeks after the event, and no attempt had been made to move or shift any of it. I can hear movement in the far back but there is no answer, even when I call out. I backed away to wait near the car and called the friend, who then called the guy living there. He assures me that his friend is there and waiting for me to come in. I enter just as a 50 to 60 something year old dude comes out of a back room in a teeny tiny towel. He is soaking wet and smirking at me, one lazy eye wandering around. He wants to start the interview portion of the inspection like that. I ask him to get dressed and he leaves the door halfway open while he does. Making sure to flash his junk at the door, I proceed with the inspection and interview, and he tries to touch me every chance he gets. If I hand him a stylus for signing, he makes sure his soft baby fat fingers are caressing me. I look like a stereotypical angry flannel wearing lesbian, but he is not deterred. I hurry through the walkthrough and find out that he doesn't own, he just rents, only occupies a room the size of a walk-in closet, and none of his stuff has been affected. He wanted his government check and someone to talk to because he gets lonely. Imagine him saying this and stroking his thighs as I leave. He offers me lots of alcohol that he had pre-poured before I arrived, ready to go, just to be neighborly. He would even let me use his favorite glass. I booked it the hell out of there. I've done inspections in the absolute worst parts of Miami, and this is still the creepiest and most terrible experience I've had in someone's home. It was all behavior that could be explained away as accidental, but it was deliberate pervy bullshit, and if I had taken that roofied drink I'm pretty sure I would still be chained up in one of the back rooms. On several occasions I've mentioned the guy who carried his dog around because the dog wanted to see what we were doing. It was really the man who was curious. Today comes the story of how his house was illuminated. Point: gather around, children. In the year of 1899, there was a breakthrough. The dry cell battery was invented. Hooray! But what are we gonna use this for, you ask? Torches. Electric torches, children. Or as you may know them today, flashlights. Fast forward 115 years, and you will find a man who really liked this idea. He had heard of electricity, but he did not believe in having an electrician over to hardwire his house. Point: I sheet you not, this house was filled to the faking brink. Flashlights. 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 Half flashlights. White flashlights. Black flashlights. Spanish flashlights. Yellow flashlights. Hot flashlights. Cold flashlights. Wet flashlights. Smelly flashlights. Hairy flashlights. Bloody flashlights. Snapping flashlights. Silk flashlights. Velvet flashlights. Naugahyde flashlights. Horse flashlights. Dog flashlights and chicken flashlights. They were hanging from the ceiling by strings. They were resting on every shelf, every nook, and every cranny. I swear to God, that house must have been accountable for half the Duracell business as we know it. That guy was a faking weirdo, and probably still his first day on the job, and it has not been topped. Wow, this is a hard one. I've seen some shit. Literally, that's my job. I work in the affordable housing industry. I've seen all manner of faking shocking, terrible sad roach and bed bug invested nightmare fuel. I've seen hoarders who lost faking pets until they rotted in their homes. People who sheet in buckets, cut into their goddamn couch, cause they can't be bothered to get up. I've walked in and found long dead people bloated and rotting into the carpet, their liquids literally running down the walls after they melted. Like I said, I've seen some sheet point, but most disturbing, I'm gonna go with the DIY Setch dungeon with homemade strap-on, made with a bicycle in a tube, a do, and sheetrock screws. DIY style pulley system, swing etc. There was stuff all over, toys, lube sheet, actual sheet, on the floor and toys. There were prices written on the walls for things like anal, blue jobs, or 3-way with mom. Yeah, you read that correctly. Did I mention that they were pimping out their own 3 kids? So we of course called the cops. They photoed the horror show. They never got all of them. They had ran. They got 2 of the younger girls at school and put them in foster care point. That one haunts me. More than the gross ones, it's the ones where kids live in a hell their parents made. It's so unfair, it sucks to work in an industry that is jam-packed with the worst kind of people. But every now and then, I meet someone the system was built for, a kid going to college. People handed keys to a safe, clean place after living in a shelter, and it makes it worth it. I worked for a beach house rental company when I was in college. And part of my job was to go inspect houses to make sure that everyone had left before the cleaners came point. So there was this one house. The renters had left on Friday, but because of some holiday, cleaners weren't going to be there until Monday point. I walked in the house on Monday morning and was hit in the face with something pungent and wrong point. The smell was incredibly strong. Whatever was there had been there a couple of days. It was the kind of organic rot that doesn't just happen overnight point. I looked all over the house. I couldn't find anything out of sorts. The house was, actually, remarkably clean point. I go into the kitchen and the smell is strongest there, but I can't find its source. The refrigerator was empty and clean. The garbage cans had been emptied, and I couldn't figure out where this awful smell of death was coming from point. Then I opened the dishwasher, and the smell was so bad that I almost threw up and passed out point. So, here's the thing. There used to be this trendy life hack thing where you could essentially steam fish in the dishwasher. What you do is you take a piece of fish and you wrap it in foil and you put it in the dishwasher on the top rack and you run it on a cycle without detergent. And the heat from the steam and hot water cooks the fish point. Welp, these geniuses decided that they were going to do that, but with crabs. So they jammed about 3 dozen live crabs into the dishwasher and then filled the detergent tray with Old Bay seasoning. They must have been sheet-faced drunk when they tried this, and it didn't work. Worse, once they realize that the dishwasher wasn't hot enough to cook or even kill all the crabs, they gave up. But they didn't take any of the crabs out of the dishwasher in any event. They let the things sit there and sit there and sit there. Nobody cleaned it out, despite the smell that was growing in the house point. I'll never forget that smell point. Clever idea. Absolutely faking atrocious execution. It wasn't really strange so much as it was outright funny. I cleaned aqueducts for a bit and saw the insides of lots of houses. We got to this guy's house and the dude seemed blazed out of his mind. His eyes were incredibly red, he kept smacking his lips, and he was eating from a seemingly bottomless bag of chips the entire time we were there. I was taking the grates off the ducts when I got to the last one right above the TV. I unscrewed the covers, slid it off, and what do I see inside his duct? A bong. Dude stored his bong inside the aqueducts. Wanting to keep professional, I took the bong out and rested it on the table as he was coming into the room. He said, "Oh shit man, my bad. I didn't want you guys to see that when you got here, so I hid it up there." I had a lot of internal questions for the guy, like why would you hide a bong in your aqueduct when you're getting your aqueduct cleaned, or why didn't you just put it somewhere we wouldn't be, like in your closet or something? I just laughed, told him not to worry about it, and cleaned his ducts. I think I freaked the poor guy out though, because I heard him rummaging around his bedroom for a few minutes, then caught a massive whiff of weed, presumably him trying to relocate his stash out of paranoia, and he seemed really on edge the rest of the time we were there. None of us even considered calling the cops, but if we told him that, it might have made him sketch out more. Decades ago, worked for an office equipment company, had to go pick up a photocopier from the ultra posh home of married pair of mental health professionals that had cancelled their lease. When we arrived to pick it up, both of these psychologists started in about how they knew that the machine was transmitting copies of every document they scanned back to the government of Czechoslovakia, where they had emigrated from, and that they were going to sue us and or initiate a human rights tribunal for the betrayal. But that wasn't the strange part. The strange part was the art on the walls. The copier was located on the second floor, and we had to bring it down the stairs to the foyer, past an enormous oil painting which they were very concerned that we not inadvertently damage point while we moved this enormous piece of 1990s technology down the stairs using a clunky powered stair dolly. They hovered around us enumerating the many ways we would regret any damage we caused to this life-sized head-to-toe nude portrait in oil of their teenage daughter, in Forks classical style, beside the stump of tree. Particularly troubling was the way they elaborated on the theme of how they would be furious if any harm came to the painting, not because of any intrinsic value of the object itself, but because their daughter was the most beautiful woman in creation, combining the very best features of both of them into a package that was universally desirable, regardless of the viewer's gender or sexual orientation. It didn't take much longer than half an hour from start to finish, but everything that was heard and seen made me deeply worried that their opulent lifestyle was furnished entirely, I assume. The compensation they received by giving mental health advice to people who needed it. I was helping someone from my church move out of the house they were renting. They had already moved out their pets, but the cat piss smell was so nauseating that I could barely retain consciousness. I spent most of my time taking things from the front door to the truck, so I did not have to be inside. I felt bad for their landlord. Another time I was checking out rental properties and saw one that seemed underpriced by a fair bit. Figured it wouldn't hurt to check it out. The owner said cats weren't allowed on the property, but it was clear that he had only recently made that rule because the house was rank with fury. The door was also locked with some kind of door wedge mechanism from the inside, so that clued me in that the particular neighborhood we were in was not a good one. He had only showed me the living room and one of the bedrooms before I told him that we were both wasting our time. Clean up after your pets, cats especially. You won't notice if you're living in it, but friends, family, and prospective buyers certainly can. Used to install cable for Comcast. Had a bunch of people answer nude and also had a gun pointed at me for needing to inspect a pole hanging over someone's fence. But the one I will always remember is the time I witnessed a married couple completely fall apart. Started off normal until the wife logged into the computer to test the internet for me. When I told her to type in the router login, she had her own, so it started with a sus or something similar. Well, when she hit as the Ashley Madison website popped up in the autofill, she flips out and clicks it. Her moron husband actually saved his login to Chrome, so she popped in and immediately found a ton of dick pics and shit he had been sending people. Welp, she's pissed and starts packing his sheet up. Meanwhile, she tells me she wants to change the order and has me install X1 HD boxes in all the rooms with DVRs and a full package. I'm talking adult channels, foreign channels, even those stupid subscription services they offer on Comcast now like the AMC Plus thing. Basically she told me fuck him, he's gonna be paying for this sheet from now on, so I'ma get mine. Of course, I don't care, because that just makes the job last longer, but also keeps me off the road on a rainy day, which is great for me. So I run all the wires and get the boxes all set up, and guess what happens? Husband shows up right when I'm finished. So she goes off on him, throws printed out copies of messages and sheets she found, proceeds to tell him why are you sending that little thing around online? It's not impressive at all. She says to grab all his sheet and that she's already been corresponding with a lawyer. Dude is crying on the couch begging her to let him stay as I give her step-by-step instructions on how to use her new voice remote. Every couple minutes she would tell him to shut the fuck up because she wanted to know how to use it. Plus his crying was faking up the mic in the remote and wouldn't understand what we were saying. Yeah, that was a fun day. House cleaner here. cleaned weekly for a pediatrician, and her house was disgusting. Ants crawling all over the kitchen, sheet all over the toilets, cat pup on the floor in one room. You get the picture. One task was to change the bed sheets. Now, she had a basset hound and 2 cats who were allowed on the bed, but she never washed her blankets. They were covered in fur, dirt, and smelled awful. That's not the worst part. She didn't have a bed frame, just a box spring and mattress on the floor. I'm making the bed and my shoe kicked something. I started to reach for it to pick it up and stopped just in time. It was a sheet covered butt plug. I left it there. Get to the other side of the bed and the nightstand drawer is open a few inches. Enough for me to see several butt plugs in there, all caked in dry sheet. Some had flaked off, so the bottom of the drawer was covered in sheet too. The smell was horrendous. I'm not easily grossed out, but that grossed me the fuck out. She was pregnant too. I feel terrible for her kid. She has to live in that environment. My friend was hired on as a manager for an apartment complex and got me a job as the guy who fixes stuff. So he takes care of the tenants and I make sure their sinks and bathrooms work, also mow the lawns, pick up trash, etc. We both get free rooms plus really good pay. Owner of the complex is an awesome lady. It's a fairly large establishment with 12 buildings and 8 apartments in each building. That's a ridiculous 96 apartments in total. For the most part my job is super easy. No set hours, work on my own schedule, friends with the tenants, get my own work shed. There's no room for moving up, but I can see myself doing this happily for 40 more years anyways. Sometimes the tenants are weird, not so great, or downright terrible. My buddy tries to weed out the bad ones, but some slip past. The worst/weirdest 2 examples are as follows. Young lady going to college in the area, who had her apartment paid for by her parents. Always getting noise complaints. These rooms are borderline NASA approved soundproof, so that's not easy to accomplish. Complaints about tossing trash out her front door, moving around other people's outside stuff, which is just a dick move, and having pedestrian traffic in and out of her apartment at all hours of the night, usually of the loud and rowdy kind. After a semester we assumed she would flunk out of college, but this T800 disguised as a cute college freshman made it onto the damn dean's list. So my buddy goes over the courtesy rules with her. Beyond the regular troubles, she never missed a payment, and it does calm down a bit. Only for me to get word that her dishwasher is broken. So I set up a schedule to go by and fix it 9 months later. Joking. Got to it the next day and opened the bad boy up while she's at college faking thing is full of condoms. Of every color of the rainbow. At least 24 different condoms were jammed into the blades of different colors, sizes, and brands. I have no idea why there were 24 condoms in her dishwasher, but I took a pair of tongs from my toolkit. You learn what tools you need pretty quickly with this job, and got them all out. On my way out of her apartment, her neighbor was waiting for me and started getting nosy about what was going on, and let it slip that a bunch of guys had been ushered into her place late last night. So yeah. Orgy/gangbang cleanup wasn't part of my original job description, but whatever. She moved out in her junior year, but still goes to college, and still makes dean's list. Another lady moved in with her 2 kids and everything was fine at first. Then she got a, well, let's call him a Dave. So this Dave basically moves in with her without going through the proper channels. By the time my buddy figured it out, a few weeks had passed. And it became pretty clear when I was summoned to fix a broken ceiling light. And when I say broken, I don't mean a bad bulb. It looked like someone took a baseball bat and just started slamming it into the ceiling where the light was. I was half right. It was a broom handle. This Dave psycho had gotten drunk and angry and just went to town on the light because he wanted to make a point to her. Whatever, I don't mess with that, told my buddy, and he worked out the rest. But when I went to fix the light, replace the entire faking fixture, that's right people, pro bono self-trained electrician at your service. Please don't tell anyone, I might get fired. I went into the home and immediately noticed that Dave was, for lack on any other redeeming qualities, an artist. Entire place was filled with clay sculptures, paintings, and etc. that Dave made at some studio downtown and brought back here. All of them crassly sexual. There was a clay sculpture of a naked woman laid out on her back spreading her labia, a painting of a transsexual masturbating onto a woman dressed in what I presume to be a shark costume, and it was just all over the place in an apartment with 2 children. I made a remark about exposing children to this, and Dave didn't really understand my comment, and said he needed these here to inspire him. Well, I relayed all of this to my buddy and Dave has since been banned from the property after the lady of the apartment was given an ultimatum between eviction and heartbreak. Dave did not however take his inspirations with him. Those were all placed in black trash bags and tossed in the dumpster by the lady after he left. Despite the temptation to keep one, I have a girlfriend and didn't want to go dumpster diving. My life is pretty fun. I did insulation work on rehabilitated apartment complexes in rough areas of the city. Most if not all were on long-term disability or welfare. I would have some people not answer the door on purpose, but I had a maintenance key and we notified them that if they didn't answer we would be entering. Nobody cared, just sat and watched the TV and ignored us. Half of the apartments reeked of weed. The rest just smelled like trash. Some people were such bad hoarders of trash that there was a small narrow path from the front door to the couch to the bathroom. The kitchen/bedroom was just filled with trash. Some of the disabled folks obviously had mental issues or otherwise should not have been living by themselves. Morbidly obese with stained gowns that they looked like they haven't changed out of in months. Just both sad and gross all around. The only thing that upset me and made me mad was people living there and not working with a huge 60-inch TV/Sparks/etc with blunt roaches and wraps on the table. Obviously abusing the system. Fire department responded to a call of a house fire from a residence. Alarm company unable to contact owner. On scene to a beautiful 2-story wood frame home, no fire or smoke showing. Made our way inside, and as soon as we got the door open we noticed 4-foot stacks of newspapers everywhere. This huge home had so many paper stack that there was only a small pathway from room to room. We got to the kitchen to find an elderly person under a pile of papers on the floor that had fallen on them while they were making breakfast. The bacon caught fire and set off the alarm, but didn't set any of the stacks in the kitchen on fire. We clear the papers and start to treat the patient. All of a sudden we hear a huge cracking sound and the floor shifts a couple inches. The weight of the papers was too much for the house to handle. Emergency drag the patient out of path of papers to get outside. Patient was okay physically. Come to find out that the shifting we felt was actually the floor collapsing. Little did we know that the bottom floor was full floor to ceiling with newspapers and in effect stopped the collapse. Since the floor couldn't fall any further, newish house had to be condemned and ultimately torn down. Never found out where all the papers came from. Sprinkler inspection outside the apartment was a fake plant which was full of Halloween skulls inside. Immediately see bloody footprints leading from the first door on the left. Sign on the door says morgue. The walls, floor, kitchen and everywhere else are filled with typical Halloween decorations. This is midsummer. There was a ton of stuff like weird dolls and masks. Literally every surface is covered in this stuff. Enter the back bedroom and the walls are covered in a sort of third wallpaper in the form of dungeon walls. The bed is draped to all 4 corners with a black veil hanging from the ceiling. Turn around and see 2 pretty cute pups. Go to pet them. I then see a cat in the corner. As I go to pet him, he looks at me and this cat has eyes roughly 3 times as large as normal cat with weird blind, starry look to them. I'd never seen a cat like this, and it freaked me right the fuck out. Turns out it had lens luxation. I would dissuade you from googling that, because it can be nasty. Google alien-eyed cat. I believe there's a famous one named Matilda. TLDR entire house a strange shrine to Halloween. Midsummer. Scary looking cat with giant space eyes scared the hell out of me. I'm a maid for a franchise company. We are small, still, and take what we can get. A lady calls us and asks for out service. She fired her last cleaners and no one has been in there for a month. To cats who roam free in the house. Pretty standard stuff. When we were inquiring about why she fired her last crew, for our safety, it was because of a restraining order against the owner from the cleaners before. She mentioned it was because they kept breaking sheet. Okay, fair. She mentioned she had a lot of knickknacks that she worried about, so just dust around them. We clocked this in as a 9-hour clean, 4.5 hours for 2 cleaners. You can probably see where this is going. Point now, my fellow maid had already gotten started for 3 hours by the time I got there, and she was still in the same room she was when she started. Point holy Christ, guys, this house. Point I entered and gasped. Shelves filled with antiques, tables everywhere, stacked with books, and you guessed it, fragile items, glass china, etc. She had like this taxidermy owl collection right in front of you when you entered, and they just stared at you, as if they were, like, I know man, sheets faked here. My favorite was the stair rail to the upstairs. At the base, you know that final wood pillar at the end of the stairs toward the end, there was a cherub lamp precariously, balancing. I almost knocked it over 5 times while I was there. There was a pedestal in her library room that was probably 7 feet in the air, wobbly, with a huge china vase wiggling on top of it. Sheet like that all over the house. The cats were running everywhere avoiding me and my partner. It took us 7 hours, both of us, 14 man hours, to dust this house without breaking anything. Point yeah, no faking sheet, your cleaners broke stuff. Point honestly, it was probably the cat's fault. There was shattered glass everywhere. I used to have to help my grandma clean up these shitty rental properties she had. It usually ended up that the tenants would not pay rent, stay 4 months for free, trash the place and eventually leave. The worst one was a bunch of meth/heroin addicts who had gotten messed up, ripped a huge hole in the wall, and destroyed the water line for the downstairs. It partially flooded the place, and they shut the water off at the valve, and didn't say a word. So for months, they didn't have any water. And they stuffed every closet and storage space they could find down there with garbage and buckets of piss and shit. Not only that, but left broken meth pipes and used needles all over the floor in 2 of the rooms. So we had to pull out all of the carpets because they were still soaked and were growing mold. Had to have the place tested and professionally cleaned to remove meth residue. Had to drywall most of the walls because they had punched or stabbed huge holes into most of them. Had to get the water line replaced. Had to replace most of the appliances and light fixture because they had broken or disassembled them, and had to fill an entire dumpster with shit and garbage. After that, I told my grandmother that I loved her, but I was not doing this ever again. I was helping for free, and she was renting to some of the biggest scumbags on earth. I'm hesitating to answer this question because as crazy as this will sound, most of the people involved were decent human beings in poor health and or bad situations, and b, a lot of this stuff sounds far-fetched to me, and I lived it. But what the hell. Point submitted for your consideration. I worked briefly as a home care assistant, meaning for less than a year, until I was able to re-establish employment in my regular field. Essentially I would be sent to various people's homes where, because of medical disabilities, they needed an extra helping hand with everyday household tasks. In a nutshell, this is some of what I saw during my short stint. A morbidly obese woman who required a Hoyle lift to travel between her couch and bed. To pup, she would have to be transferred to her bed and rolled onto an underpad, lying sideways. She had huge open sores on her butt. Her husband, a legless amputee, would then put on latex gloves, spread her butt cheeks, and dig out the nuggets with his hand. Another morbidly obese woman, also an amputee with no legs, put on her prosthetics, stood up, dropped an underpad on the floor, and said to me, "Okay, I've got a pup. Don't judge me." She balanced herself on her prosthetic legs as far apart as she could get them, and proceeded to pee, and dropped juices on the pad, in the middle of her living room. Elderly man with severe dementia in his 90s, living with his functioning autistic 50-something son who was also incapacitated by health issues. They had a mean-tempered little dog who was allowed to shit and piss any way he pleased around their home. Part of my duties involved cleaning up after that faking thing, and taking it for walks. Dad would do random funny/crazy stuff around the house due to his dementia, setting off his son, who would explode in these livid, but ultimately impotent tirades. I actually looked forward to helping these guys, because they amused the hell out of me. An elderly gay man with a catheter and pee bag. My introduction to him was visiting his home with my supervisor, who knocked on his door, and phoned him when there was no answer. On the phone he told her he'd be right down. 20 minutes later he finally walks up to the door literally wearing nothing but an apron. Awesome view when he turned around. He spent most of the time wearing a bathrobe and looking at gay porn on his PC. He had other assorted gay porn videos, magazines, just laying around the house. One time he had me put laundry away for him. I found a black dildo in his sock drawer. There was a big poster-size picture of his late partner on the wall. He looked like a gay Bill Cosby. This client actually turned out to be pretty smart and an enjoyable guy to talk to despite his idiosyncrasies. The ironic thing about his porn addiction was that he'd been surgically castrated for medical reasons. Once upon a time, I was a door-to-door style knife salesman. The office manager had done a large event at the county fair and gotten a couple dozen referrals which she distributed to us salespeople. Setting the scene. So, maybe predictably, I end up at an absolute shack of a home. The front porch was a freestanding jumble of old lumber and reused nails, hanging about 4 inches off the proper house. The smell of mold and a variety of urines was overpowering, and every single floor surface literally squelched underfoot. Sitting on the couch was an enormous man, poured into a threadbare pair of overalls with the bib half down, and his hand on his dick. Next to him was an older lady who may have legitimately been catatonic. She was in a nightgown which was being held together by the lace collars and crusted food stains. They were both watching a portable TV propped on top of a broken 60s style TV set. My appointment was with the wife/daughter. She answered the door in pilled latex shorts and a strained sports bra. We walked through the living room into the kitchen where we sat down at a disgusting table which has been showed up against a fake cardboard chimney. About 3 feet off the ground there's a big hole smashed in it. When I first noticed it, it struck me as particularly odd within this house of horrors, so I lost my train of thought for a moment. The customer noticed and launched into a whole story about some previous Christmas when the ex brought over his new girlfriend. So her mama had pulled a knife and the ex promptly attacked the old woman. So her daddy choked the guy out and put his head through the fake chimney. I heard about the court case and everything. Weirdest thing I ever saw. On the wall behind her, there's a heap of food. Open bags of cereal, piles of crackers, cookies, chips falling out the bag, moldy apples and leaking bananas, jerky, PB&J, open jars of olives, frozen french fries and pizza, pickles, condiments, butter, old eggs, pasta, Tupperware containers, raisins, puddles of goo, piles of crumbs and rat fesses all over the grimy floor. Above this was an undulating black mass of flies. It was probably 8 inches across and thick. There were thousands just stuck to this piece of wall. Little clumps of flies kept falling into the pantry. I cannot imagine what awfulness was smeared into the wall that would be so enticed to 10,000 flies. It low-key haunts me. I asked her if they had some power outages, but nope. That's just how they kept their food. There was a refrigerator, but I couldn't tell if it was working, and I'm sure it was horrifying to open. Bonus, at the end of the sales pitch, a cockroach crawled across my open-toed sandal and a ways up my ankle. I died inside while shaking it out of my pants leg and smashed it in the middle of the kitchen with the woman plainly watching. But she demurred, looked off and just said, "Oh, somebody got a stink bug." I ran away with her $800 check. I never felt so bad about making money. She should have put all that money into cleaning products and counseling, but she couldn't be dissuaded from buying super sharp knives for her violently dysfunctional family. I worked as a home inspector for a while after land surveying work went away after the property crash in 2007/8. I saw a couple of weird things, including one couple in their 70s who had their own Setch dungeon replica set up in their attic. They even had life-size posters of full frontal nude body shots of younger people with the couple's faces photoshopped on the model's Setch toys, and bondage stuff were laid out in the room. They were very nonchalant about the whole thing. One thing that bothered me the most, when I was doing the work, people would sometimes leave their young children alone to let me into the house. If I knocked on a door and a child answered, I would ask to speak to an adult, and if no adult was available, I would politely tell them we would have to reschedule and I would leave. I refused to go into a house with just a child present. The people I worked for backed me 100% on that as well. Cable tech was in an older lady's house and had to keep moving little kids' toys out of the way, rocking horses, little push cars, small dolls, etc. to get back to the wall plates and check some connections. This was in like 3 or 4 different rooms in the house. Didn't think anything of it. I see plenty of kids' toys every day. I just assume this older lady has some grandkids. Whatever, she keeps asking me to please be careful when moving stuff, which I'm doing of course, because I'm not here to mess anything up. She is like visibly upset that I'm moving these toys though, and is hovering and watching nervously, so now I'm a little more aware and not quite turning my back to her all the way. At a point I notice there are no pictures of her or her husband anywhere now. No pictures of kids or grandkids, no pets. Everything is immaculately cleaned and spotless, and there's no sign of any kids ever having been there. This strikes me as odd because of all the kids' toys with baby dolls on them. I move the push cart back to its original location and she once again asks me to be extra careful as these are her babies. What? That's when I notice all the rocking chairs, push carts, baby cribs, toy chests all have an actual baby doll sitting on top of them, or laying inside them. There are fake bottles, the kind with the fake milk in them that moves everywhere, random pacifiers, a stack of those little fake baby changing diapers that kids use to change the diapers of their baby dolls, just all kinds of weird shit. I'm talking like 6 or so little baby dolls in all the rooms I have been in so far, except the living room. Just a little creepy. I hate dolls and kids stuff from all the horror movies I've seen, so this wasn't ideal. Had to go outside and change the connectors and ground block in the house box, do a little outside work, come back in, and she's walking around burping one of the baby dolls. Fuck, that told her I was finished because I was. Got a quick signature and just noped the hell out of there. I realized that she's probably just some old lonely lady. Maybe she couldn't have kids of her own. I don't know her story. I'm sure she has a story. I don't care though. I was creeped out and didn't look back. Guess it's mild compared to some other shit on here, but that was creepy as hell to me. During the worst of the housing crisis I would go into homes, take photos, write a report, and tell the bank how much money they would lose when they foreclosed. At an expensive and large home in an upscale neighborhood I was greeted by a 45-year-old white woman with breast, lip, and butt implants. She was a good-looking woman before all of that and now looked like a pornster. She greeted me with a bored "Go ahead and look around," and I proceed to do my inspections and take photos. I did the ground floor first, then went upstairs. When I opened the double doors of the upstairs master suite I saw a 4-meter tall by 2-meter wide portrait of the board house floor, stark naked, spread eagle, with her hands behind her head, tigs pushed out, and an exaggerated expression on her face. The master bedroom and bath were an easy 2,000 square feet, so it took a while to photograph everything. After about 10 minutes the lady of the house ran up the stairs and screamed, "Stop this instant." To which I replied, "I'm not allowed to take images of people, or pets, or even photographs of people. I can show you on my camera that I have no images of your nude painting. I don't care about that. I thought you were up here jerking off. A neighbor did that at our Christmas party last year. Yeah, nope." I did work at a hotel for 10 years, and the only thing we never walked in on was a dead body, thank Christ. But it's not the nude people, sex toys, drug paraphernalia, bloody sheets, human feces rubbed on the wall that really sticks out. I was doing an audit shift, 11 PM to 7 AM, and protocol requires us to wedge the door open in any room we enter. I'm a big dude and never did this. The hotel owners always gave me shit for my safety. One night I get a call about bugs coming out of someone's toilet. I'm thinking to myself, I know how toilets work, no way this is possible. I go to the room and noticed the woman brought cleaning supplies with her. She shows me the toilet, and I expect bugs to be crawling around, flying, something. She has me looking at the back of the toilet, where the porcelain end in the metal begins. I reassure her that it's just the toilet, not bugs. For some strange reason it creeped me the fuck out, and I never forget to wedge the door open again. I was working with a crew that was knocking on doors at a seedy apartment complex and evacuating people because of rising floodwaters. Knocked on a door and the door opens, and the very first thing I noticed was how bad it smelled. Like straight up BO. Next thing I noticed was the guy at the door who answered was in his mid to late 40s and overweight, wearing nothing but tighty whities. After looking into the apartment for a second, I saw two more gentlemen in their mid to late 40s also sitting around wearing nothing but dirty tighty whities. Now I'm thinking to myself, alright, this is super weird, and then I happened to notice they had no less than 100 guns just lying around in the open. Rifles, handguns, shotguns, a faking crossbow. So now I'm like, alright, this is some The Hills Have Eyes stuff going on. We told them about the evacuation and left. I still to this day wonder what the heck they were doing. Okay, I have told this story, but I will tell it again, even if I'm super late to the party. Point: I used to work for a furnace cleaning company. One time my partner and I show up to a house, and he gets excited because he grew up in this neighborhood and this house is weird, and he has always wanted to go inside it. Point: the first thing to say, there are tons of lawn decorations. Mostly animals, but lots of floating lanterns too. As we get closer we notice two things. First, there is no front door or way to get to a side or back door. Second, some of the lawn ornaments have had their antlers removed and replaced with real deer antlers. Weird. Point: so we can't get in. Can't find a way to ring a doorbell. So we call and they answer, but the person on the other end is nervous. We have to come in to clean the furnace. Oh, alright then, we will just open the garage door to let you in. So the garage door begins to open, and we go in and knock on the door to the house in the garage. Noon is there. Noon answers. For nearly 10 long minutes nobody answers, and so we open the door and let ourselves in. Point: the door opens to the top of a staircase that leads down into the basement. The basement and the stairs are dark. We call out, and nobody responds. We go down the dark stairs into the dark basement and turn on the lights. It's a basement suite kitchen with really old appliances and dated furniture from the 70s. Noon is around. My partner decides to start setting up, and I go look for some folks. I follow the hallway out of the kitchen and deeper into the basement. It's a long hallway with lots of doors, but I ignore the doors and keep going. Eventually I get to a spiral staircase roughly in the center of the house and go up. The upstairs is dark too, but less so because light is getting in through the sides of the curtains that are drawn shut. I finally find some people amongst the dated furniture upstairs. It's a very old lady in a sheer nightgown and what appear to be two very ugly, very scary looking helpers. A lady and a man who are missing their teeth and kind of hover around the old lady. Oh, you need to go into all the rooms into the house to deal with the heat registers? I thought you just cleaned the furnace. No, we need to go in all the rooms. Sorry. They look pretty nervous about that, glancing at each other and giving each other sideways looks. Fine, they say. Go into all the rooms if you must. Point: and so I do. And there were a lot of rooms because the house is so big that it even has two furnaces. And guess what was in each of these rooms? Extremely sick and alone and dying people. Sick and alone, and also scared now from the sudden intruders. All hooked up to machines to help them breathe, and covered in hardly any clothes at all. And their bodies all covered in scars. And none of them were prepared for some crazy dude barging into their rooms and messing with their heat registers. Don't tell her I'm smoking in here, said one guy who was wearing only tighty whities, a very thin and old bathrobe, and a collection of deep and horrible surgical scars on his chest. I'm not supposed to be smoking in here. And then our truck exploded. They weren't old trucks exactly, but they get a lot of use. It was our transmission for the vacuum function. We called the office, figured out how to switch it back to regular engine, stick the broken part up to the rest of the truck with a bungee cord, and got the fuck out of there. Point: the end. I worked for an electrician a few years back. We were on our way to a house for some electric work. As we drove by this government building, people were outside picketing and protesting a government employee for possessing child pornography. I guess he was well known in the town. Point: when we arrived to this house there were boxes everywhere because the owner was moving. The woman who lived there let us inside and told us what work needed to be done. She looked like she hadn't slept in a week. When she finished telling us what to do, she had apologized for her emotional state and had explained to us that her husband of 20+ years was recently arrested for child pornography. Point: turns out it was the same government employee. Point: my heart really went out for this woman. The betrayal she must have felt knowing her husband did this is unimaginable. Of course my coworker sent me to the basement of this house To remove all the ceiling light fixtures I never came across anything, while down there it was completely empty and cold with barren walls and a concrete floor. But needless to say, the thought of it all made me sick to my stomach. The entire house just had this eerie vibe that I couldn't shake. We immediately left the minute the work was finished. Bank foreclosed a house, legally evicted the people. New guy buys the house, which is full of stuff, clothing, toys, furniture. He calls and emails former owners, no answer. His lawyer does the same. Weeks go by. Finally, owner hires crew to take all the shit to the dump. I get hired as a contractor for the remodel. The place was shockingly filthy, and I have seen a lot in 25 plus years. I opened the kitchen cabinets, looking for booze, of course, and there were several nests of mice, looking at me with no fear. I discovered a dozen nests, in the drawers, under the stove, in the cabinets. It was obvious that mice had been there for months at least. I left 3 roach bombs to gas the house overnight. When I returned the next day, the house was carpeted an inch deep with dead roaches, ants, and centipedes. I think the mice hid inside the walls, because the stench went on for weeks afterward. Bonus. The first week I was there, I was standing with the owner outside when suddenly this tatted up as whole Hawaiian dude comes up and says, "Where's all my sheet, bruh?" The owner, former Marine, calmly explained he had waited a week past the legal time and finally had everything junked. The dude was in shock, walked around the house, it was all gone. His fat little piggy wife was on the sidewalk, crying. Both were tatted up and dripping in gold jewelry. The dude then shakes the owner's hand and goes away. Bonus #2. Grandpa's ashes were in the garage with his picture on the box. That went to the dump too. I deliver appliances. I once go to an old man's home around 70, 80 years old. He said follow me to the kitchen to show me where to install his stove. I looked over at his PC. In the desktop background is a pic of a very attractive lady in a corset and thong laying face down looking back at the camera with a man crawling up behind her about to faceplant. That as no one was nude, this was his background. Like I saw all the icons over it, so I go inspect his outlet for the stove and tell him I'll go get the new one ready and BRB. I tell my rider what happened and he's like, "Do you think the guy was jerking it?" But I said no, because the door had been cracked when I got there, and he was on the couch when I knocked. Now here's what kinda weirded me out. I come back in, and he has now changed the background on the PC to some generic tropical island. I'm like, okay, so the dude realized it was inappropriate and changed it. Simple enough. Then his wife gets home, and the entire time I'm finishing up the install he keeps shooting me side glances. Like obviously wondering if I'm gonna say anything. I didn't, so all of this may not seem too strange to some, but I have too many questions on it. Was he masturbating before I arrived? Was this his version of porn? Did he not know about videos and porn sites? Did he change the picture because I was there, or because he knew his wife would be home? I pass no judgment on the man. Hell, I hope I'm still battling the purple-headed yogurt slinger at that age, but damn dude, pick some more erotic material. Probably too late for me, but I had a job where I went home to people to check their fire alarms and extinguishers. I get into this one top floor apartment which is pretty big. The woman who lives there is at least 90 years old. The weird part is there was one single light on in the entire apartment, and the TV. You probably think that is quite normal, but the TV was just showing snows and the white noise on analog TVs when you have no signal. I'm already quite dreeped out and hurry doing my job while this woman keeps making awkward flirty remarks. But when all of this was done, and I'm like, well, I'm done, have a nice day. Actually, I had some forms to fill out, but I decided to do that in the hallway outside. She asked if I wanted to stay for a cup of coffee and a snack. Totally freaked me out. Felt like I was in a horror movie with this old crazy person trying to be nice, but I actually a murderer. She never did anything though, but was glad to get out of there. I used to run a painting company. I gotta say, in general, the sheer amount of dog poo, like so many people have shit in their house. There was one woman who was restoring this older home. She'd obviously put a ton of work into it, but there was crap all over. Like there were pee pads in all the rooms and then just random shit all over. She obviously hadn't potty trained her horde of tiny dogs and they were just going in the house. And she wasn't cleaning up after them either. Some of the sheet was practically mummified. But her house was otherwise clean. It was so odd. Like clean house, all redone, with mummified sheet all over the place. Why put all this work into restoring this home, just to let your dogs crap all over it? She was a nice lady, but obviously dog obsessed. Her bigger dog nipped at me. No damage and I didn't call it in or anything, but someone else did. And then she called me looking for a back quote reference, that her dog was fine with people in the yard. Lady, your dog bit me, and the only reason he didn't break skin was because of my heavy work pants. And you think I'm gonna give the dog a back quote reference for animal control? Used to drive for a cable installer / contractor in South Carolina. He had gotten a DUI and couldn't drive. I saw a lot of strange shit, from hillbillies and massive Confederate flags, to racist black families who kicked the guy I worked with out of their home, while they let me stay and finish the job. He's white, I'm black, then later proposed I date their underage daughter, and take her back to California with me. The funniest and most memorable was when we happened onto a haphazardly zoned trailer park full of makeshift utility poles with cables running all over the place. When we walk in we are greeted by a heavyset middle-aged woman wearing a dingy muumuu with random stains on it. Oh, and she was holding a goose like it was her pet cat. She pointed to where she wanted to have the cable box installed and sat down with her 2 geese. The other one was trying to GTFO the whole time. We went to work. First running the cable from the janky utility pole to her trailer, then went inside to hook up the box. The whole time we were installing her equipment, she sat and talked to us, while the 2 geese squawked and shat all over her moo. I sat there flabbergasted. I had just moved to SC from suburban California. That sheet was weird, while, without even a stutter, she reached out for a roll of paper towels next to the couch, and wiped off the goose sheet from her cleavage / belly / crotch / forearm / couch. The geese just kept squawking and cheating. I kept staring, wishing that a tornado would swoop down, lift me up, and whisk me back to Southern California. We eventually finished the job, and loaded up the gear into the truck. When Tim, the dude I was working with /4, goes, "Hold up, I gotta run back and get something." Tim was in there for 10 minutes, before he came jogging back to the truck. He had this flush look on his face as I drove off. You could tell he wanted to get something off his chest, until a few minutes later when he giggled. She let me play with her big old titties. A month later, I was back in California. I've done maintenance work for years, starting off in an apartment complex, and now for a large college. The absolute worst thing I've ever been involved with is evictions. I'll bypass the bleeding heart stuff and leave it at that. I don't have the stomach for that task. I did participate in one eviction, where the girl getting put out had not only a solid stockpile of what I assume was cicada bee, but box after friggin' box of dill, DOS, and homemade born starting herself. As I recall it, the rental office actually held onto that stuff, just so it wouldn't embarrass her being out on the sidewalk. Other than that, I've seen some truly impressive roach problems, but little else truly noteworthy. Working for a college with tens of thousands of students living there is awesome. They're almost all totally cool, even with me being old enough to be anyone's father now. It's really a lot of fun. It never ceases to amaze me how normal they are overall. Sure, you'll have someone request a repair, show up 10 minutes later, let yourself in, because they don't answer the door, and find them beating off in the living room, but that's unusual. I'm run plenty of dumb calls. There's a kid or 2 every year who is a total nuisance, and other normal irritants, but nothing big. I'll tell you this though. One time I got a call for a clogged cheater in a remote women's room in the library, and arrived to see the most terrifyingly no key I've ever come across. It was about 12 inches long and nearly as thick as your calf. It was so sturdy that it bridged across the bowl. It still strikes fear in me. Really though, the worst I see is the work that others have done. Structural rot that could collapse an entire building. Water shooting up out of floor drains in major rainstorms because a contractor cleaned out his cement mixer into the storm drain. I've seen unsecured swing stage come through the window. Floods where the person knowingly let a toilet overflow and went home for the weekend, flooding out floor after floor below. CPVC sprinkler lines allowed to freeze in unconditioned attics. Sofas stuffed into all the elevators and set on fire. I don't know. But given the number of calls I've run over the number of years I've been doing this, people aren't really half as weird or filthy as you might expect. Used to deliver and install appliances. We never encountered anything too weird, but we did encounter plenty of gross. Two gross incidents in particular stand out. Point first was a washer/dryer combo which we had to install in a cat lady's home. The smell was so bad. Seriously, it was disgusting. My partner and I actually took air breaks, so while one of us was installing the combo, the other was outside getting fresh air. As a nice bonus, when we removed the old unit, there was a large puddle of amber-colored liquid on the concrete basement floor. I don't know if it was cat pee or cat pee tainted washing machine leakage, but either way, it was nasty. The other was a refrigerator delivered to a straight-up hoarder house. The house was a mess with stacks of stuff all over the floors and counters with narrow paths between them. The fridge itself has given out, and it had taken the owners so long to clear enough room for someone to remove the old fridge and bring a new one in that everything inside had rotted. They did not empty the fridge until we arrived. We would have kept the doors to the fridge closed to contain the smell, except we had to remove them to fit the old unit through the door. I'm a line cook now, but some mornings I help my buddy with his business and its residential interior work. We were in a retirement community installing blinds throughout the house including the master bedroom. I just happened to look down, and this old fella's top drawer to his dresser is out, and lying there in a row are about 4 or 5 Polaroids, if him in some kinky as leather. For a bonus there was a dick pic finale. My sudden shock of seeing his aged wrinkle corkballs gave way to the motive. He knew we'd be in the room. He knew we couldn't avoid seeing the pictures. I told my buddy to come help me with something and gave him the head nod with the eyes hinting to take a look. He looks, jaw drops and then looks at me where I'm almost giggling and I mouth/whisper, "This dude wants to blow us. You go first." We start laughing and finish the work fast as possible. I clean up while he goes to get paid and I wait in the van. He comes out a minute later and we take off and laugh and joke about it. I kept one of the pictures. I'll look for it and post it. Point I didn't keep any picture. I did. What the fuck is wrong with you? Prior property manager here. I went out to conduct an announced inspection on behalf of a homeowner. I advised the tenant of when I would be there and that if she wasn't present, I would gain access using the homeowner's key. Point I arrive, knock on the door, and no one answers. I opened the door, calling out to announce my presence. Since folks are sometimes in the shower, I go to each room, loudly announcing myself. When I'm satisfied that the house is empty, I start carefully checking each room, notating and photographing any damages or lease violations. The inspection is completed with a walkthrough video, narrated by me, naming each room, and highlighting anything I found that would be of interest. Point. So I'm walking through, and this joint is dead silent. Windows cracked, with the exception of a couple of ceiling fans turning on low in the bedrooms. I'm pretty relaxed at this point, as I have walked through the entire house twice. I walk into the master bedroom, stopping near the bed at the center of the room. While I'm turning to video the entire room, movement catches my eye. In a flash of what I can only describe as the largest scrotum ever, this creature from the pit of hell explodes from under the bed and latches onto my left calf muscle. As Satan's ballsack sinks its teeth into me, I begin to scream like a little girl. I'm 6 feet 1 inch and 330 pounds of bearded beast, but in this moment, I want my mommy. I go tearing through the house, in what I can only imagine looks like the weirdest and fastest hokey pokey ever, trying to find relief. Once down the steps, and into the yard, the creature dashed away. It was a hairless cat, not on the lease. I sat on the front steps in a bleeding, trembling sweaty heap. This cat had chomped on me several times, and clawed me up pretty good. I called the tenant, and was advised that I should look out for her cat, and that he sometimes wasn't very friendly. Point noted. I do TV in Texas. Lots of Texas is rural, so you're always bound to go to the horrid cat/dog sheet/piss everywhere places, and lots of horrible trailers that should be condemned with whole families living in them with windows missing, and lots of "yeah we got it dirt cheap" so we can renovate its statements when they've obviously lived there for decades like that point. However, if we are talking weird, then mine may not be surprising. We are supposed to leave/contact management if firearms are brandished or out in the open in any way, but viva la Tejas, guns are not a surprise. There was one house, however, where this guy had everything from modern rail-style rifles to old shotguns and borderline muskets leaned up next to every single door. Like this guy was ready to be raided at any given moment, and stated proudly they were all loaded with extra ammunition stashed in every room. There were lots of doors and hallways with easily 15 plus guns leaned up everywhere. I had to have him move some to run cables. Had this guy not looked like Burt Gummer from Tremors with a big smile, I would have noped the fact right out of there, but sadly this mentality is pretty common when you get way outside the cities here. Finally, one I can say something to. I worked for a certain satellite TV company in Arizona. There was a large storm in Sacramento, California, and they had an overload of service calls they needed help with. A group of us flew out to take the new installs so the local guys can handle the service calls. So, there was one's house that got double booked, and I met up with one of the local guys as we are both assigned to the job. Pretty house, well maintained, customer was a pleasant lady, offered us water, made us feel welcome. It was 5 TV installs, so we divide and conquer, take out 4 TVs, and start asking her about the 5th. She got uncomfortable and said it was for her dad's room. She asked us to teach her the remote and how it works so she can take care of it. We explain we still have to install the box because we can't activate it until it gets a signal. So she warns us, my dad is a Vietnam vet and he is a little funny, but go and state what you are going to be doing. Please try not to look around and try not to engage too much with him. I'll start trying to teach him the remote so he doesn't bother you. We go into this back room and it looks like we stepped into the jungle. Yellow wallpaper with bamboo and palm tree decals. Bamboo furniture and privacy dividers against the window. Human faces spread across the wall. Playboy magazine spread across his bead. Several, not exaggerating, several 110 volt wand vibrators, all with visible sheet on the ends. He seemed pretty calm. We got introduced before walking and he asked how we were and about the weather before randomly laughing. The daughter interrupts him and starts showing him the remote. I took a photo of the numbers, plugged it in, and started calling it in while my partner was quickly running through the setup. We ended up with a big heartfelt apology and a decent tip. I just felt bad for her trying to help her dad and not sure how. Did crawl space work for a friend that knew he had a rabbit and a family of possums living down there. The rabbit was an old pet and the reason they knew there were possums is because baby one crawled through the vents and popped up in the house. So they kept it as a pet point anyways. I go under the house and it is one solid layer of rabbit pup from the entrance to about 15 feet out and started to be less concentrated. But then I crawled a little bit further to the downed insulation, which was filled with rat pup. Luckily the rats had vacated. Now, just clearing the rat poo insulation, I get to the home of the possums. The smell is disgusting through the mask and now I'm crawling through the third type of poo for the day. I eventually find the hole that had been chewed in the air duct. I shine my headlamp in there and as far as I could see there was a solid 2 to 3 inches of possum pup piled up inside of. I pulled out as much as I could, but barely got any of it in comparison. Taped up that hole and got out of there. As far as I know he still hasn't cleaned his air duct. I did in-home tech repair and got a call for a slow computer. The buddy I worked for was like, "You're the rookie, you get this guy laughing a little too hard." I show up and immediately know why he wouldn't take it. We live in a small town and this guy is quasi infamous. He's an old creeper that's been around since my mom was a kid. He used to walk around and take pics of girls walking down the sidewalk and stuff. I think, oh, this should be interesting, as he shows me into his efficiency apartment. It's a real small place, like 1.5 room type place. Kitchen with living room / bedroom kinda thing. I take a quick look around as I walk to his PC and there is literally porno mags littering every flat surface of the place, all spelled open for the world to see. So he says it's running so slow I can't use it. I immediately think, yeah, no crap, it's probably filled to the brim with viruses from shoddy porn sites. So I sit down and try to touch as little as possible. He walks over and lays down on his fold-out couch a few feet from me. Did I mention he's like 70, shirtless, about 5 feet tall, wearing a red beret and wrist and ankle bracelets, like Claire's from the mall stuff? Yeah. So he lays on the bed breathing really faking heavy, rubbing his flabby little chest and stares at me dead-eyed, and doesn't say a faking word the whole time. All I can think is if this little faker tries to touch me, I'm busting out the kung fu and breaking that stick of an arm in half. I run a few malware programs and get his PC fixed and get the hell out of there as fast as I can. I get to my car and use an entire bottle of hand sanitizer on my hands and arms and call up my buddy to chew him out and tell him never again. That guy would call back regularly and specifically ask for me, but I never went back. I used to work on billionaires' houses. They have, by far, the weirdest shit. One house had a tin man on their deck, except the tin man had a 3-foot long stovepipe dick. That same house had another steel mannequin upstairs that had 13 legs, each with a different Air Jordan on it, but if you walked around to the back it had a big rubber vagina right where it should be. They also had a burial mound right next to the house. Another house we worked at had a giant periscope window that looked over their neighbor's house. Another house had a soundproof chamber in the basement. We called it the murder room. None of us had any idea what it was for. Another house was owned by the son of someone who was famously kidnapped in the 30s, and we were remodeling the entire estate to the stage it is pre-WWII. We had to work from old pictures, paintings, and old home movies. The weird part was we never met the owner. He was senile and traveled around the country in a fortified RV. He would call the caretaker from a payphone and give him directions to give to us. It was crazy. Rich people are weird AF. They used to say super weird shit to us too. One old lady showed up drunk to show her house we were remodeling off to her friends. I was cleaning concrete forms and was the only one there. She kept trying to bribe me with expensive chocolate to take my clothes off and run to the lake and back. She was plowed, and so were her friends. I just tried to laugh it off and politely reject her comments. She was joking, but in that not really joking way. A couple days later, I was transferred to a different job site and I've always suspected it was because she complained about me. Can I submit for sheer quantity? Used to be plumber, so I've entered tons of homes. My standout experience was this. We had a contractor regas pipe project, over 100 units, in North Chicago, Illinois. Yes, plumbers also gas pipe. Every day, we'd let residents in the project know that we'd be coming in that day, where we needed to work, what we were doing. In about 85% of the apartments, the residents would do nothing to help / prepare. At first we tried to be helpful and move stuff carefully. Eventually, as we fell further behind on the actual work, we started just walking on people's sheet and tossing stuff out of the way to get to where we needed to be. On our list of experiences, actual hoarder who had so much stuff in her unit we had to move boxes of newspaper out to our job trailer, so we had enough room to gas pipe inside the house. She was freaking out about moving her garbage, general disgusting inch of garbage through entire apartments. Think soda cases, pizza boxes, ungodly amounts of random laundry. Another dude had his entire only bathroom filled with garbage. Where did he sheet? Better not to ask. Cockroaches. All the time. Everywhere. I'm not a plumber anymore. Not strictly a strange thing, but a funny moment. I used to work for a music shop and part of the job was delivering and moving pianos for people. One job we had involved picking up a player grand piano from a bar after an event and returning it to the owner's home. The bar was a very popular gay bar in Newcastle. It used to be. It's not there now. It was called Dad-O-N-E. The owner of the shop was with me on the job. You should know that this owner was an evangelical Christian. The proper Bible bashing, creationist, fire, and brimstone kinda guy. Anyway, we get the piano out of the bar and into the van. I expected a comment, but he didn't say anything. We got to the owner's home and he let us in, directing us to the lounge, where we began the process of reassembling the piano. The owner brought us some coffee and snacks while we worked, and he was a delight. Positively one of the most wholesome bar owners I've ever met. It was about 10 AM by this point. As we were finishing up, another man walked in wearing a short silk robe, greeted us and started chatting away with the customer. Well, my boss eyes just went wide. The penny had dropped for him. Once the piano was up and running, he went back to pack the van up while I sorted out the payment and signatures from the owner. He asked what was wrong with my boss. I told him he was alright, just a bit tired and needed some air. When I got in the van, he was nearly in a panic. They were gay, weren't they? He asked. Yes boss, they were. The bar we were in was a gay bar, I replied. I was in a gay bar, he cried. Did the sparkly tiled floor and the pictures of young, fit lads on the walls not give you a hint? I didn't notice. Objectively, it was an awful example of religious bigotry that he was so upset about being in the presence of a gay couple, but it may well have been the funniest thing I've ever encountered. In the basement of a chiropractor in an affluent neighborhood, dog fesses. Not a few, but what I estimated to be several months worth. Since it was a large home, and the basement was empty other than skateboard ramps and poles for sliding on, it was my best guess. Yes, the kids had been skating through the poo. Guy had a wall of Scientology books. I thought for a long time that old chiropractors were this crazy, but apparently they are not. Another home, but opposite end of the spectrum. Uninstalling an alarm system from a non-paying customer in Detroit area. No electricity. Went into basement to remove panel and found, again, fesses. But this time, human. Estimating several weeks worth. I nearly tossed up. It was pretty close. Another home near Detroit, but definitely even further down the scale. I had to pole boat across a basement on a couch to complete the installation of an alarm panel. I found a person sitting in an armchair down there in the near dark. He grunted something, but I don't know what, because I pretended I didn't see him. Dude was sitting in water up to his waist in that chair. I used to do flower deliveries. Sometimes folks invite you in. Let me tell you about one of those. The man ordered a lavish arrangement for his wife and wanted to surprise her when she got home. I pulled into a house with 2 ponds, 3 pools and a 9-car garage, probably sitting on over 30 acres. As I brought the arrangement in, we get to talking. He's a nature enthusiast and wants to show me his nature room. Okay, why not? So he was an avid hunter and had all his trophies stuffed with realistic murals of their habitats painted behind them. Here's where it got super weird. First off, I'm horrified because I adore animals and live on a farm. Why am I horrified? Oh, well, because he had stuffed all these amazing trophy kills. Think zebra, polar bear, lion, grizzly, etc. He stuffed them so they were smiling this insane toothy grin. He said he had them stuffed smiling so his grandkids wouldn't be afraid of the dead animals. I'm just going to leave that here. My heart broke when he said he was headed to hunt wolves next, as I have 3 that are my best friends in the whole world on my farm. I deliver appliances. Here's a fun home. I went to the front porch of this dude's house. Has a turtle on it. Not so weird, right? Well, wrong facko, because it was a real turtle, and not just any real turtle, a dead one that had to have been decaying for a couple months. So we enter this dude's home and this faking stench hits us. That is so foul my eyes water. This guy is just sitting on his couch chilling. I look to my right on the ground and there's a litter box. Kind of an odd placement for a litter box, being right next to the door and all. And then I look to the left of the litter box and there's a bucket. This bucket was probably about 6 to 7 gallons. And what was in that bucket, you ask? Cat sheet and cat piss piled nearly to the top. So then we walk through this dude's kitchen, and I swear, if you told me that it was a sheety trap house, I'd believe you. Just sheet everywhere. And this guy had this Bunsen burner he used for cooking. What? Faking fentanyl laced meth. Probably. It's a good thing we are delivering an oven, so he can really up his cooking game. Some of the highlights of this dude's kitchen counter included a 9V battery with a paper clip attached to it, among other things. Since we are also delivering a washer and dryer, we get to go in this man's bathroom, and on the way I see a trash can that was filled to the brim, and which probably wasn't emptied for weeks. So we enter this guy's bathroom and it's worse than the normal house smell. There's sheet everywhere, not literal sheet, but you get the idea. There's this brown stuff on the floor and I don't know if it's mold or fecal matter, and honestly I'm too scared to find out. I feel like if I touch anything in that bathroom I'll contract mega AIDS. I tell the guy I'm working with that I'm gonna step outside as he measures the old washer and dryer we're gonna take out. I get outside and I have never breathed fresher air in my life. I honestly felt super bad for the guy. One of my friends is a personal chef. She had just taken on a new client. She hadn't gotten through the home visit process yet but had sent the client the required materials list, contracts, and all the other necessary paperwork. She had scheduled the home inspection for the following week. Over the weekend her father passed away. She needed to fly back to her hometown to make arrangements and deal with it all. She asked me if I would fill in for her. Once I had said yes, she then asked her clients if it would be a problem. None seemed to have any issues, including this new client. She gives me all details I need, and I basically take over her business in her absence. Date with new client rolls around. I have called to confirm that I will be meeting with them at their home at a specific time. I arrive 5 minutes early. I ring the doorbell and client's 30-year-old son answers the door masturbating. He insists I come in and tell me his parents will be out in just a minute. I try to tell him I will just wait outside as I'm backing away, but his mom walks up in bondage and a bottle of lube in her hand. Before I can say another word, dad enters the entryway on his hands and knees. I tell them that I will have my friend call them when she gets back into town. They keep insisting I should come in, that they signed a contract. I felt badly. I was afraid I would cause my friend to end up in court, but I just couldn't walk into that house. I got back to my car, drove around the corner, parked and called my friend. I told her everything. She laughed, told me that's not the worst she had seen, but that she was sorry I went through it. She assured me that she could cancel the contract due to some clauses and not to worry about it. A few years later I was working in a retirement facility, and who are the newest residents and family that want to meet the chef? You guessed it. At least now they all had clothing on. The son would visit daily for several hours and wouldn't let any employees in their suite while he visited. Just as I was about to go 2 hours about it, one of the nurses reported seeing the son kiss his parents goodbye at the end of a visit. She said they took turns tongue kissing and groping one another. That family was moved out soon after. Realtor, and I do property management. I see all kinds of stuff, such swings that people leave up while trying to sell their house, sheety diapers getting squashed into the carpets by tenants who are pissed that the landlord is selling the house they are living in. Toilet in a master bedroom. Passed out meth heads on couches in homes that I've opened to show. Naked men getting out of showers. Pretty sure that every time that happened it was on purpose. They did know I was going to be there. Best. Very neat, clean, average home. Main level of home decorated with Bible phrase knickknacks and a glazed poster of Jesus himself holding a lamb over the fireplace. Downstairs basement was a family room, a laundry area, a bathroom and a teenager's room. The teen's room was typical. Movie posters, concert ticket stubs on a corkboard. The teen was a painter, easel, and paints, art displayed on the walls. One of her pieces was in the log cabin themed family room. An image of Jesus on the cross, completely naked, no loincloth, and with a raging boner. I tried to stand in front of it to protect my client's impression of the home, but it was too late. It was forevermore called the Jesus Dung House. I'm super late to this, but I used to be a cable technician for Comcast. Not a contractor. I worked directly for Comcast. There were only 2 houses in which I had called my supervisor and refused to enter. The first one was disgusting. They had a service call for their cable box not working. I entered the house to start my troubleshooting, and the floors were completely covered and moving. I tried to power through, nearly throwing up, but once I got to the cable box, it was completely full of moving bugs. I booed out of there so faking fast. I called my boss and told him to clear the job and send someone else back that point for the second home. Everything seemed fine till I got to the basement and I saw a litter of puppy pit bulls living in the dark on their own sheet. I'm not saying it was a basement that we would normally think of, but a taller crawl space with dirt and stuff. I said, I need to grab a tool, and left to call my boss, and then called the police. Fact, those people point last one is more funny, but I have a friend who is Wesley Snipes black. Like almost Precious purple dark. So let's start there. Him and I are working on of his jobs in a super white neighborhood. We were there for like an hour and a half. Ran this guy's whole house pretty much. It's raining and just humid as all hell. I'm a fat guy, so I'm sweating balls. He looks at me and asks if I want some water, Coke, Gatorade, or juice. Then turns to my friend and looks him in the eye and says that he has orange soda. I wish I was exaggerating when I said that I had almost pissed myself. I was laughing so hard my friend had to politely decline and drag me out of the house. The funniest faking thing I have ever seen. Also, that guy had a chubby kid that kept hitting me with a foam sword, saying you're dead now, fuck you, you little cunt. I'm working. I used to work in flooring installation. We were replacing the floor in the kitchen for a family. Well, the kitchen was adjacent to the living room, where we had to move the table and such from the kitchen into. While we were moving furniture, I noticed that on the mantle of the fireplace, along with family portraits and Christmas stockings, this was in March, there was a crudely drawn anime style picture of a girl colored in with colored pencil framed alongside the portraits. But the all-time worst was when we were doing a bathroom remodel for a college professor. The man was a really nice guy, lived by himself, and kept a very tidy and clean home. But the first thing we noticed when we got there was this awful smell that just stunk up the whole house. It was just one of those smells that was unmistakably something dead and rotting. So after a few hours we couldn't take it and went about looking for the smell, which led us to the basement, afraid we might find a dead body or something. After being unable to find the source initially, we were about to give up when my boss spotted a chest freezer in the corner, buried under miscellaneous thing. We got it uncovered, and his first instinct was to open it up and look inside. Big mistake. As it turns out, the freezer had died and stopped working what we can only assume was weeks ago. There was no body inside, but the man had kept fish in there. Well, it had thawed and started to rot. We ran up the stairs gagging. About halfway up we realized we need to get this thing out of the house, and turned around to grab it and haul it out with us. To this day, that was the absolute worst smell I have ever witnessed. I can still recall what it smelled like in alarmingly detail, just by thinking about the situation. Used to be a mobile home technician, set up new homes and took down old ones. Once went out on a level that's where a home has been sagging, and so you jack up the sagging parts and put in some shim/etc so make it level again. These folks had a couple dogs and a litter of puppies. House a little rundown but nothing too bad at first glance. I'm at the edge of the house about to stoop down to look around when Mike, the guy I'm working with, says don't do that until you have to. I straighten up and look at him quizzically. Fleas. I nod. But there's nothing for it, job ain't gonna do itself. So it's into the flea circus, scooting along with a water level in hand. The house, like most of them, is low enough that you can't crawl, just scoot along on your belly. The underside of the home, like most mobile homes, is usually some sort of tarp-like cloth, and each time my cheek touches it, I feel things crawl across my face. I finish the level and get out. There's approximately 1 flea per square inch all across my body. Mike runs down to the corner store and buys a can of off. We soak down with it and try to dust off the fleas before getting back in the truck. Surprisingly, I don't get bit a single time. Just another day on mobile home duty. At least this time there wasn't a puddle of sewage, a rattlesnake, and a bunch of dead cats under the house, all of which I've seen at other times. Not so much weird as it is funny. I was doing some remodeling in an assisted living building, and there was this super sweet old German couple that lived there. The wife was more or less confined to a wheelchair and the husband pushed her everywhere they were going. I thought it was the sweetest damn thing I ever saw. Fast forward about 6 months, and I'm back doing more remodeling on another part of the building. I saw that the old German husband was always walking around by himself, so I asked the director of the place about it, and she told me that his wife had passed away a couple months before. I was kind of bummed out by the news and felt like the guy was probably super sad about losing his wife. This assisted living facility has a gym and snack bar that the elderly and the nurses are free to use and indulge in whenever they want, and they are right across the hall from each other. The snack bar has this awesome ice cream machine, and every week they have a different flavor. One day I was going to grab a quick ice cream cone from the snack bar when I see the old German fella already indulging in one and staring into the gym with this nice little smile across his face. As I get closer to him, I notice there is a very attractive nurse in there, running on a treadmill. At that point I realized that the old fella was not really grieving too hard. TLDR, old fella's wife died. I caught him checking out a nurse while she was running on a treadmill months later. Realtor was helping a doctor and her wife RN find property in the country they could build a cannabis farm on. We are in Oregon, and at the time they were medical growers, which now they have a recreational license, and they were on a budget. We find 20 acres for $450K, and the property has a couple of triple wide trailers and some shanty-like apartments for migrant workers. All the residents had been given notice of our inspection and had left for the time we were there, except one lady in one of the triple wides. We were informed she medically could not leave, so we were to inspect the property around her. She was a relative of the seller apparently. We go on site and the seller's agent meets us and warns us the triple wide is a scene. We walk in and there is an old school wood stove installed and actively burning. When we walk in, it's hot in there, like scorching hot. There's magazines, like thousands of them, stacked all around as high as the ceiling. There's a hospital bed in the middle of the room when you enter, and a woman who must have been 600 pounds is laying on the bed, naked as her name day. She has a very thin sheet pulled up over her chest and her legs are exposed. They are covered in sores. Next to the bed is a daybed pushed against a wall. There's a overweight teen girl laying on the bed. She's sucking her thumb and rocking back and forth on her bed. The bedridden woman informs us this is her autistic 16-year-old daughter, and she's very upset we are there. The girl looks at us and asks us if we are going to kick her out of her home. My clients, being medical professionals, of course immediately go into care mode and try to reassure the daughter as well as ask the bedridden woman if she needs any assistance and what her conditions are, etc. While they are talking, I start exploring the rest of the home. I've seen a lot of decrepit fixes, estate houses, foreclosures etc. But this one took the cake. It felt like I was in the movie 7. I walked into a back room. It was like a maze in there. There were so many illegal additions, and come across a very thin, frail looking old woman with a thin hospital gown on and sitting in a very non-functioning looking wheelchair. She smiled at me, no teeth of course, and motioned for me to look around. As I walked down the hall to another room, just as I started to open another door, the bedridden woman yells to me not to open the door at the end of the hall, the one I'm about to open. I just had started to push it open when it was violently shoved shut, like someone threw their entire body against the door to shut it. I completely noped out at this point. I walked to the front room, told my clients I'd inspected the structure, and I was stepping outside, and I think they should join me. They ended up buying the property. The seller relocated the family members, from what I was told, and the triple wide was an illegal structure and was demolished. If it were legal, I would burnt that thing to the ground. Edit, a word. I had an appointment to service a piece of equipment up in the master bathroom of a fancy home near Beverly Hills. I get there ready to take care of business and their security guard has us give him our driver's licenses, which was new for me. The guard was armed, but he appeared like he could kill you with his bare hands. Not that he was huge, but he exuded commando prowess. So we get up to the bathroom to do the work, and I'm noticing the nice bathroom and how cool having your own urinal would be. At this point I think the owner is just some billionaire, and after working a bit my coworker goes downstairs to use the maid's toilet. When he comes back up he's mentioned seeing in the hall a lot of pictures of Tom Hanks. So the owner must be someone with Hollywood connections, I tell him. So I go down to use the maid's toilet next, and I see the hall of pictures, and it isn't just Tom, it is his whole family. It's still not 100% making sense to me until on my way out the front door I see a gift left for the owners, and its tag says to Tom and Rita. That's when I knew I was jealous of Tom Hanks' urinal. Not my story, but it's so good I have to share point. So I work for a double glazing company, and when I first started working there, a colleague of mine told me a story about what he found when he went to measure a property's windows. So my colleague goes out on a call to measure some windows at a rental property. He goes to the letting office to pick up the keys prior to visiting point. When he arrives at the office to pick up the keys, the lady asks if he would take a look around the house and give his opinion on how many people were living at the property. Apparently there was only meant to be 3 people living there, and they had a suspicion there was a lot more than that living there in reality point. So he arrives at the house, goes inside, and proceeds to measure the windows. The letting agency seemed to have been correctly suspicious about the number of tenants, as he found the majority of rooms with mattresses and clothes racks scattered all over the floor. He guessed 10 to 12 people must have been living there. Point. He measures the rest of the windows and exits the house. However, on his way walking down the driveway, he sees one little pantry style window he missed and goes back into the house to measure point. Finding the pantry door inside the house, he walks up to it, opens the door, and a mattress that was pressed up against the door proceeds to fold out, and a rolled Asian lady jumps up in shock and starts shouting in what he assumed was Chinese. Point. In his panic, he attempted explain why he was there and quickly measured the pantry window before apologizing and exiting the pantry and closing the door behind him. After getting back in his car and still feeling a little bit strange about what had just happened, he realized the pantry door didn't have a handle on the inside, and he had basically just locked the woman back in the pantry. Point. He didn't know if she was a tenant/prison or such slave. When he went back to the letting office to drop the keys off, he told the lady he thought there was about 10 people living there, gave them their quotation for windows, and never mentioned the elderly Asian such slave he'd accidentally freed and the locked back up again. I worked as an at-Uverse wire technician in Smyrna, GA for about a year around 2015. I installed cable/internet/phone in people homes. I had done work in some very pleasant, unpleasant, and straight up strange people's homes. The strangest was this daughter/hoarder. I've done work in 2 separate hoarders' homes who lived in her parents' house, who were also hoarders. I think she was in her mid/late 20s. There was a designated path to every room, but you couldn't leave that path. But everything was neat. I mean, every space was filled, but everything was on a table or hung nicely to cover as much space as possible. In the parents' room they had hundreds and hundreds of designer, I assume fake, not to mention about 100 of bottles of perfume on a table, all open and somewhat used. I had to go into the daughter's room, and she had some badass fishy mirrors on one wall and a corner with 50 plus Winnie the Pooh stuffed animals ranging in size, all neatly placed on top of one another. It was a beach, because running lines in that house was not easy. Point. But to level it out, one time I had to work on a house all day, and they bought me pizza and soda from Domino's. Another old couple gave me their old flat screen after I helped them fix their new one by just fixing their cords. None of the bad ones stick out really, so I guess for the most part people are good. I didn't enter their house, but when I worked as a delivery driver I delivered to what I believe was government assisted housing. The address was for an abandoned warehouse. The instructions said go to the back. Well, first I parked across the warehouse on the other side of the street, so I can see what is waiting for me in the back alley, to make sure I'm not about to get carjacked. After seeing that it's empty, I call the guy and ask him to open the door and wait for me. I see a door open in the distance, and I head over. When I get behind the building I see 5 evenly spaced doors on the back of the warehouse. All of them had some steps leading up to the door like a stoop. Some even had a car parked next to them, and the one door that was open was the last one. Anyways, I go up to deliver the pizza and I get a clear look at the guy. He was the typical poverty-stricken dude who looks 50 years older than he actually is. His wife didn't look any better, and she was missing half of her teeth. He says to me, I don't have any cash for a tip, but I could let you fuck my wife right now if you want. I'll watch. I couldn't tell if he was joking or if he was being serious by the way he said it, but I declined the offer and proceeded to swiftly leave. Many years ago I was doing freelance PC support as a side job. A guy in his late 60s stops in and says that he has a problem with one of his computers, DOS machine, 386 processor, not backing up on schedule. He explains he is one of only 3 people in the country who set up some type of special antenna system, and he has written programs to configure them, and the code is on 3 computers that each run a backup of his programs every day. He didn't need to back them up every day, but he is paranoid about losing the code because he makes $60,000 for setting up a system and he only does 1 or 2 of these 1-week jobs per year. I go to his house and find that he is a hoarder. The trails are barely visible. I get the PC and take it to my workshop. I have the PC for 2 days before I can take it back. By the second visit, the spot for the PC is covered in a stack of new hoarded stuff. He just purchased the PC on top of the stack and that is its new home. There is a bed nearby, but there is something odd about it. And a smell. He has apparently urinated in the bed many times and the mattress is stained. The urine has rusted the bed springs out of the box set under it, and the springs have fallen out, and the box mattress is now flat. I'm a home inspector. While inspection a 5-unit townhouse, there was a old man in the very first or last unit however you look at things. This man's landlord actually passed away 2 years before said inspection, and was living in what was supposed to be a vacant unit. No one took the time to notify him I guess, but he kept sending in rent. Probably why they didn't tell him point. So I go to check this place out, and first thing that I noticed was an absurd amount of DVD pornography everywhere on the first floor. Stacked in towers. I'd estimate $20,000 worth of DVD pornography. I venture to the basement and less odd, but in tandem with the pornography, was a massive collection of those toy trains. Being far more experienced in the pricing of porn, and know nothing about toy train collections I have no idea how much that was, but there was a lot of trains moving on to the second floor. There was knives, katanas, swords, all of the sort hung on the walls guarding what? You guessed it. More DVD porn. I swear this man had to have every physical copy porno ever made. Needless to say I didn't touch anything. Never met the guy, but the new property manager said he'd shoot for the good old fist bump over a handshake. Point edit. Grammar. Kinda. Late to the party, but here goes. I worked for Mars Tech for a couple months installing DirecTV last summer, and ended up on a call to upgrade a client's equipment one afternoon point. So I pull up to this rundown single wide with a dude on the porch smoking a cigarette and drinking a beer. After introductions, he gives me a tour and shows me where I'll be swapping boxes at point. The main box was a large rear projection TV from the 90s. The picture looked like a 3D movie when you take your glasses off. The back bedroom seemed to be a storage closet, but it had a small 10-inch TV. But the worst was the middle bedroom point. The middle bedroom had a queen-sized bed, no frame, right in the middle of it. Directly in front of the bed was a large mirror anchored in the ceiling and the wall in a way to create a 45-degree angle in the mirror. Perfect for viewing yourself. Next to the mirror was a newer flat screen also mounted to the wall. When I went to swap the box, I accidentally touched the DVD player which ejected some big dick porn. The customer, his friend, and some woman with no teeth were all in there with me when it happened. I just pushed the tray back in, did my swap, sign here for the work order, have a nice day. And here's a little pro tip when it comes to signing sheet for DirecTV or Dish. That warranty sheet is them getting you to sign up for the protection plan. It's free for the first 30 days, but ranges from $8 to $25 a month. Most people don't want to spend more on a plan and techs are pressured to sell it, so we come up with ways to sell it without you knowing you bought it. Never did it for a living, but did short term 6 years ago. I was hitchhiking the USA and was told about the great market for vagrants to make money picking / pruning weed in the Emerald Triangle, if I remember correctly, so naturally I head that way. It was a small place and there were an absurd amount of traveler trying to get a job clipping weed. After hanging out in one town for a day or two, I changed my cardboard sign to say that I just wanted a ride to the next town, hoping to maybe get work. This 60-some Willie Nelson looking guy gave me a ride to the other town. We made generic conversation in which he told me he did have a small farm and was harvesting, but he didn't need any help. No problem. He dropped me off, and I put up my sign here. About 5 hours later, dude comes back and tells me he needs me after all. I'm a guy who actively tries to give people the benefit of the doubt, plus I'm desperate for work after sitting for 3 days, so I say okay. We head back to a few acres of land with a generic mid-size house. I meet his son and a Hispanic middle-20s timid fellow, and we all smoke for the evening, cause it's late. I sleep in a renovated bus that's right next to the wheat field with the Hispanic guy. The next day rolls around, and things are looking good. We talked money and we were to get to work. I learned the Hispanic man was from Costa Rica and the owner had rescued him. I don't recall his exact verbiage, but that was the sentiment. I felt bad for him and brought him back. Well, I come to find out that the guy had been in the USA for around 3 years. I asked him how he liked it, and he said I don't know, I've never left the property. Now this is one of those internet how did you not catch that things, cause it didn't hit me how whacked out that was until a few days later after just 5 or 6 hours of work the owner said he didn't have work after all, and he would pay me and drop me back off. On the way back he started talking about how he had money and proceeded to directly ask me to have sex and he could handsomely compensate me, during which we were driving and he put his hand on my thigh. I took his hand off and said money doesn't make me happy, to which he was completely perplexed. I got dropped and the rest is history. Mighty, one of the biggest single regrets I have in this life. I work for an ISP installing fiber and we talked about our funny encounters yesterday at lunch. One of our sale reps told us his story that about a visit he had at an old man's house. The old man was sitting on a bed and told our rep that his dog hadn't been very active lately. Then he saw it under the bed and pulled it out. It was dead and stiff as a board. My direct colleague had another story about a dog as well. He entered the house and saw the man was wheelchair bound. Nothing wrong with that. He then noticed clumps of tissue paper scattered throughout the house and realized very quickly they covered individual piles of dog sheet. The man was unable to work his dog, so instead he covered the sheet, and everyone knows sheet goes away if you cover it. I also had an encounter with animals, the dog being the most normal animal in the house. I was surprised by the full-grown goat nearly running into me when I went through the kitchen and into the living room. The smell was the worst. His place reeked of goat. He had around 15 different kind of animals in his 2-room apartment. Snakes, birds, pigs, goat, dog and a caiman was some I identified. I, for reasons both unfortunate and entertaining, live in a literal abandoned house. My ex-boyfriend's family is so impossibly dysfunctional that once the grandma died, they essentially left her house untouched. I mean including food, clothes, mail, etc. For 20 odd years the whole family is hoarders, and since I'm poor and have agreed to only pay the property tax and utility bill, I get to live in this abandoned house. It's cheaper than anywhere else in this city. The house is full of thousands of dollars worth of antiques, and those assholes won't sell any of them, despite constant whining that they have no money. I exist in the middle of this with a cat, a pet pigeon, 2 fish tanks, and outside, 2 chickens and a rabbit. It's a reasonably clean house, despite the insane amount of furniture and tchotchkes. There isn't trash anywhere, no bugs, etc. Just a fuck ton of furniture and carnival glass and collectible stuff from model trains and Model Ts. I'm moving as soon as I can. I was installing cabinet doors back in the day, and we were at an apartment complex that had produced some interesting finds in the past. This particular unit was very clean, a welcome change of pace, and it was full of crosses and Bible verses on the walls, wholesome pictures on the walls and a stack of Christian musical CDs on the counter. Everything pointed to this dude being the most bland and straight edge Christian dude, but when we opened the fridge to put our water bottles in there, it was completely full of beer. And I mean there wasn't even a spot for our waters, there was so much beer. We kind of laughed it off, thinking it was kind of ironic, but didn't think much of it. Then we started taking off the original cabinet doors, and we found his real stash, a big old jar of skunky weed and a bunch of different pipes. Mind you, in Texas at this point weed was still pretty taboo, and having a bunch would get you in a lot of trouble. Again, we laughed it off at first, until we realized this dude had pill bottles everywhere as well, and multiple bottles of liquor in the cabinets too. That's when we realized that the Christian decorations were probably a front to keep his friends/family off his tail, and we died laughing. We also started laughing because we realized that behind the cabinet doors hadn't been painted properly and we were gonna have to leave his drug-filled cabinets exposed with no doors. Essentially, we were making it obvious we saw his stash and he needed a better place to hide it in the meantime. TLDR. Enter obviously very Christian home to install cabinet doors. End up finding stash of drugs and alcohol and have to leave them out in the open due to inability to finish installing doors. I used to be a low budget repairman in my 20s. I mostly worked on air conditioners for people that didn't have a pot to piss in, Florida. I show up to this single wide trailer to help this family with their broken air conditioner, and while they lead me back to their air handler, I was told watch your step. I had to step across a gaping hole in the hallway floor of the trailer. It was about 2 feet by 2 feet and appeared to be getting larger. I saw the face of a dog looking up at me through the hole. I immediately told them that the big hole is likely why their rack isn't cooling. They brushed it off and said nah, that's been there a while. I eventually found that the dogs had chewed up all the duct work under the house and were living large in air-conditioned comfort under the trailer. They didn't have the money to replace all of the duct work and said they would do it themselves. I left without getting paid a dime, but I'm glad I didn't have to crawl under that sheet hole with the dogs. Back when I was doing HVAC work, I was sent out on a call to do a minor repair, fix an airline that had somehow gotten disconnected or interrupted somewhere between the air handler and the vent at a person's home. Pretty typical call, usually very easy once you find the problem. No biggie. I get to the house, knock on the door, and the lady lets me in. I ask her to take me to the room where the air isn't blowing, and she kinda hesitates and says, "Do you really need to go in there? Can't you just go up in the attic and find where the line might be bad?" I told her that I probably could and she said I would appreciate it because the baby is asleep in that room and I don't want you waking him up from his nap. I agreed. She showed me where the attic access was. I climbed up after giving her my word that I would do everything I could to be as quiet as possible and not wake up her baby. I go up in the attic, find the torn line, measure out how much flex line I'm going to need to replace it, and head out to my truck to get what I need to fix it. As I'm heading back into the house, I hear this noise that sounded something like a cross between a rabid moose in labor and that screaming goat from YouTube, and I see the woman running down the hall and can hear her saying, "It's okay baby, mommy is coming." At this point I'm wondering what the hell is wrong with her baby that it would make such a horrendous noise, but I just head back up in the attic to fix the line so I can get the hell out and move on to my next job. I fix the line, and because I just couldn't resist doing it, when I went to hook the flex line to the vent, I looked down into the room and my jaw dropped when I saw her baby was a full-grown adult, probably in his 30s, about the same age as her, and she was changing his diaper and talking to him in baby talk as he laid there sucking his thumb and shaking his rattle point. When I finished hooking everything up, I went back down into the house, called out that I was done, and was going to be right back with some stuff for her to sign. When I went back in, she signed the paperwork. I thanked her and told her to have a nice day and left with the image of her changing the sheety diaper of a full-grown man. TLDR went to a house to fix an air conditioning line. I assume, couple living there definitely had a baby mother fetish thing going on, infantilism, and while hooking the line back up to the vent I saw her, the woman, changing his sheety diaper while he sucked his thumb and played with a rattle. I work in early intervention. Most times you meet and become close with great families. As a rule of thumb, if you care enough about your kid to go through the process, you generally care about other aspects of your life. Usually, my interesting things are more so interactions. I had one family that was particularly interesting. They meant well, but many times I was in the middle of some situations. Their communication with each other was generally yelling and fighting about petty stuff, while I sat there. The girl I was treating, her dad was goofy, but I enjoyed talking to him. He ended up telling/showing me his jaw resection and lack of teeth from oral cancer from chew. Then he excused himself to go smoke outside. Mom also meant well but frequently would yell at a few other kids upstairs to shut up. She ended up letting me know that there are 3 different dads with these kids. One morning I came, and some new guy answers the door and sort of grunted at me and said that the mom will be down. This guy and the toothless dad were boring around, saying they were off to Dunkin' Donuts, and asked if we wanted any. After they left, mom let me know that was one of the other kids' dad. Point interesting on so many levels. I don't enter homes for a living, but here's a story. Point in 2011 I was looking at buying a house. As usual, we'd set a bunch of appointments to look at homes on Saturday starting in the morning. This first house still had the current owners living in it, and they were supposed to be gone for the time we were to be looking at it. Supposed to be gone. We showed up at 9 AM, like we were supposed to, and our realtor starts flicking the numbers on the lockbox with the house keys in it, when we hear rustling around on the other side of the door and a "hang on" shouted desperately. Eventually a late 20s bearded long-haired man opens the door, shocked and a little confused, but trying to block the view inside with his mostly naked body covered only with boxers. There was also a thickness in the air that bellowed out when he cracked the door. Now, I'm 6 feet 3 inches and easily see over most people. What I saw was a bunch of naked/mostly naked people scurrying around like roaches. When lights switched on, as that thickness and funk in the air hit me and all but triggered my gag reflex. My realtor and I look at each other as the guy says, "Give me a few minutes and you guys can come in," to which I reply, "Don't worry about it. I won't be buying this house." This will probably be buried, but I used to work for a home security company working door to door. We sold alarms, cameras, glass break sensors, etc. I would deal with normal people, shut-ins, work from homes, all fairly normal. But one man I met immediately struck me as off. He invited me in after 30 seconds of telling him what I do and that I can provide cameras. He asked how many cameras a system can support, and I told him up to 10. We went over backyard, doorway, garage and all the usual stuff. Then we get to the indoor cameras. The man tells me he has 2 daughters that share a room, both 9 years old, twins. He inquires about discrete cameras, and when I ask why, he quiets down and tells me he worries they might sneak out. Again, 9-year-olds. I told him it was very unusual and I'd have to talk to my manager, just trying to escape at this point. He became incredibly defensive and told me if I had daughters I would understand, and that I'm a pervert for even suggesting anything was off. Point I don't know, maybe he was well intentioned and oblivious, but something felt wrong. Point TLDR, creepy man invites security man in and asks for discrete camera for 9-year-old daughter's room. When I was in my early 20s I delivered pizza for a while. This was in the late 90s in a small town outside of Memphis. One night I had a delivery to a small apartment building, like a place for senior citizens or disabled people or something. This was also before the internet took off and debit cards became such a widely accepted form of payment. You had to pay with cash or a check if you were having it delivered. So I go to this door and this frail man answers and asks me to come inside while he finds his checkbook. I stepped just inside the door and he started fumbling around very slowly looking for his checks, and I realized that he was pretty seriously visually impaired. His back was turned to me and I spied a large glass candy bowl filled to the rim with big fat rolled joints right on the coffee table. At this particular point in my life I was a major fan of the ganja. I had a serious internal battle right there in that guy's apartment. He's blind as a bat. His back is turned. It's right there. Just lean over and grab a couple. He kept his back turned and slowly peeled open the checkbook. I waited. He looked around, then had to go find a pen. I was alone with the giant bowl of weed. I sorta looked around for the cameras that I suspected were secretly filming me for some kind of prank show. It really felt like a weird setup because it was just so perfect. Who keeps a giant bowl of joints on the coffee table and then not only lets a delivery person come inside without hiding them, but then turns their back on the stranger and even leaves the room? I've always wondered about that guy. How did he get that weed? I had no problem getting weed, but I was a youngster who got around. Is there a neighborhood weed dealer in the disabled folks apartment building? Who rolled it for him? Was it quality stuff? Was it because of his disability? Would he have shared? Once upon a time I worked for a construction company. We did windows, gutters, siding, and other similar things. We had a job at a house in town, and being the youngest/newest guy I had to go in beforehand and clean up the areas around the windows before we started to cut them out. I went up to the door and knocked. The owner answered the door and only had half of his face, not sure if burned or birthed that way. I played it cool and was very polite and continued on to do my job. Things got weirder and weirder by the minute. He turned out to be some type of local drug lord. He was obsessed with Freddy Krueger, with an obvious resemblance, and had life-sized models in his living room. There was wads of cash everywhere, probably a couple grand's worth of $1 bills in his bathroom, and probably $5-6K in 20s on his mantle. The whole time we were there, he sat in his office and watched us on the cameras in his house. All throughout the house I would find people passed out on air mattresses or on the floor. Found several used condoms and piles of puke in several of the rooms. It was a nightmare. There was a group of guys playing some type of NBA game on PlayStation and asked me for a lighter so they could smoke pot right underneath me while I was installing windows. I decided it was time to take a break from the smoky indoors and went into the backyard. Immediately I was greeted with 3 larger boxer puppies. They were old enough to be full-sized, but young enough to lack manners, and jumped all over me. I love dogs, but, of course the yard had probably never been cleaned, and I was being jumped on by dogs that were covered in feces. The rest of the day I had to work in the house with dog shit all over my clothes. Needless to say I didn't work there much longer. To K comments, but I'll contribute anyways. I'm a real estate photographer in Dallas, Texas. A few years ago I had the luck of photographing an 8,000 square feet home that used to sit on 100 plus acres. Over the years the land was split up and sold off, which resulted in the suburban neighborhood around it. This just resulted in an abnormally large home sitting in a relatively basic neighborhood of 2 to 3,000 square foot houses. The main home structure was left unchanged. Just some of the things I was made aware of when the listing agent came by to see how it was going and if I needed anything. Also, the home was vacant, so it's not like I saw something in particular that was out of the ordinary point. So as I'm walking through I start to notice abnormalities in the floor plan. There was this one room which was like a media room, except that all along both sides were closets the size of coat closets. There were hallways in strange places and places where the walls opened to form a small window in the wall. I didn't think too much of all this, but when the listing agent came by I did ask her about it. She informed me of the things I mentioned earlier, but what really answered all the questions was that the home was built in the early 1800s. The home's last purpose was as the main house on a plantation. The media room was the servants, slaves, common room, and the things that now looked like coat closets were their sleeping quarters. The windows in the walls and extra hallways were so the house slaves could pass things through without being seen by the guests or masters. It really put a damper on the mood, and I made damn sure not to walk the grounds. It sucked that the home was so large because it kept me there past sunset, and really wish I hadn't known the evils that took place there. At around age 19 I left college, UK, and as my parents had decided to move to Spain I had to take any job I could. Through an agency I got a job laboring for the council, so this meant I was pretty much doing whatever was required anywhere they sent me. So, I had spent about a month stripping out kitchens on a council estate, and it had been quite a pleasing gig. Lots of nice single mums making brews and chatting. A few propositions of such, which I found out was really common for the guys working on jobs like this. It had been a breeze. One day my boss pulls me aside and tells me he needs me and this other laborer, who was a nice lad but as thick as two short planks, to head over to a shared accommodation and help a tenant clear the room he is moving into. This should have been done weeks previous to this day point. We arrive and meet the guy, who is a really nice guy, a recovering heroin addict, but still a nice guy. We walk in, and he hands us both a dust mask, and I said, "Is it that filthy?" And the guy says filthy isn't the word I'd use. He opens the door and this small room is just putrid. There is a mattress in the middle of the floor that was stained with piss, sheet and blood, and the whole floor is a minefield of dirty needles. The small wash basin in the corner was filled with stale vomit, and dried vomit was all over the tiles around it. The walls were reminiscent of a bodily fluid Jackson Pollock painting. But the one thing that really stick in my mind is this tatted brown chair with a perfectly coiled turd right in the middle of it. I say to the guy, you shouldn't be doing this, and tell him we'll sort it as it is too dangerous. I head to the van and pull out the hazmat suits and thick rubber gloves and some masks. We head back upstairs, and within 2 minutes my dim-witted colleague had grabbed a handful of needles and stabbed himself about 4 times after I explicitly told him to pick up one at once and two, but then in the hazard box. I called our boss who dropped off someone to help me and took the other guy to the hospital. The new guy walked in and just said, "Not the worst I've seen." Plumber here went to a house that had a leak on the toilet, was informed the customer was old and very slow to answer the door by the office staff point. When I rang the doorbell she opened the window to let me know she has get her cats into one room so I could come in. About 10 minutes later she finally comes to the door and the stench of all the cat shit hit me at once. I had to carefully walk to her bathroom avoiding all the cat crap that was about. The toilet wasn't fixable, so I told her that I had to come back with a new toilet, but I asked the office staff to send someone else. They agreed and the next guy that went there had to deal with a lot worse. The woman didn't put all her cats into one room, so he had to help her put the cats in the room, about 5 of them, and she told him just pick them up and throw them in. He spent about 30 minutes doing this as the cats just hated people and they were shitting everywhere as he was chasing them. I'm still happy to this day that I didn't have to go back. Walked into a level 10 shithole. The woman was in her 60s, walking around in her underwear sporting a kidney transplant surgical patch. The kitchen was full of steam, the hot supply to the washing machine had snapped off, and she just pointed it into the sink. It had been running the combi boiler flat out for 0.2 weeks. Went upstairs and she shouted, "Are you afraid of rats?" Went into the room, and she had 2 rats and a duck living on the carpet. It squelched with rat and duck sheet / piss. Continued to first bedroom. The entire room to bed kevel was full of fast food containers. On the bed is a man-child, apostrophe has schizophrenic she advises me, but has harmless. Kept one eye on him the entire time. I'm in the bathroom. The bath is full point of pots and pans. She comes in and proceeds to lift up her bra to show me the scar. Her tit pops out. I kept my nerve, fixed the heating and waved goodbye. Some people just slip down the chute of life. Currently doing a Bachelor of Paramedicine in Australia, and the main paramedic, we'll call him back quote SP, who's teaching our course told us this story. TLDR at the bottom. SP responded to a call out about a woman who had drunk too much alcohol and lived on top of a steep hill who had called for an ambulance. He and his partner leave the car at the base of the hill. As the driveway was not accessible to the ambulance, they bring up 2 of their more basic kit bags and knock on this lady's door. SP can see through the large windows either side of her door. She's laying down on a couch inside, but moving and otherwise doesn't seem to notice SP, so he keeps knocking as the door was locked. Eventually the lady noticed SP and his partner and walks up to the door. On the way, she trips, falling into one of the glass windows, and it was old glass, so it broke easily. She fell neck first onto the shattered glass that was still poking out of the window frame, cutting deeply into her throat. So suddenly the situation was pretty bad, to say the least. SP started treating the lady, while his poor partner ended up running back and forth up the hill fetching various equipment bags, so they could treat this poor lady. She lived, fortunately, but that would have been a crazy call. To respond to point TLDR, paramedic gets called to a drunk woman who lives on top of a steep hill, trips into her glass window and cuts her throat open on the shards left on the windowsill. Multiple trips it made up and down the hill for more equipment bags. Lady survives. Not my story, but a guy I know. He used to work in housekeeping at a hotel a few years ago, before me made a switch up and started teaching. Anyway, the best story he ever told me was of a certain famous client, who shall remain nameless, booked a room in the hotel that my friend worked at. It was only an overpass stay, so really there shouldn't have been that much mess in the room, right? Oh, how wrong you could be. Come check out time for the client. My friend and 2 other housekeeping staff go up to the room to do a refresh. When they walked into the room they found it totally trashed. I'm talking like the minibar was halfway across the room. All the food and booze was gone from said minibar. The king-size mattress was flipped up against a wall. The TV that was mounted to the wall had been ripped off its mounting. Cigarettes had been butted out on these nice wooden bench tops. Burn marks on the carpet. Carpet had been ripped up in some places and the toilets were clogged with toilet paper. And vomit. My friend and the 2 other housekeepers looked at one another and went and got their manager, who ended up closing that room down for repairs. A newspaper hoarder's apartment in Brooklyn, New York. We were there to replace the old wood windows with new vinyl replacement ones. Towers of newspapers stacked up to the ceiling with just enough room to walk through. Another window replacement job in Forest Hills Gardens, the more expensive area. 2 elderly sisters lived there. They stayed in their kitchen while my coworker I worked. I pull away a living room couch in order to replace 2 windows and see 2 old heavy paper bags there, the kind with heavy twine cords for handles. They are both filled with neatly bound stacks of cash. I call out to my friend to come out here. He's too busy, he says, and to just do it. I walk to the bedroom where he's working and say, "Stop what you're doing and come on out here." He grudgingly follows me. I show him the bags of money and ask, "What do I do?" He tells me to do the windows, put everything back the way it was, which I did. Not a single bill was touched, and the sisters had probably forgotten or never knew that they were there to begin with. I do general maintenance in a high-rise apartment. I have to put a key holder on an older resident's door for nurses and the like to get into his apartment. At the time I had lost my voice and he's hard of hearing. I enter his apartment and start yelling as loud as I can in my broken voice that maintenance is here. No answer. I walk down the hallway to the bedroom and pound on the door, and I hear the resident say hello. As soon as he sees me his eyes light up and he's so happy. He's thanking me for the key holder and he's shaking my hand for an extended amount of time and be very touchy. Just to my hands I kneel down to put the lock on his door, and the resident steps forward and has his crotch right in my face, and it finally clicked. There was always stories of the older man who is really into younger guys, and he was all over me when I was there. I left right after that, but he did bring drug addicts in for favors in exchange for money. I don't go to his apartment alone anymore. Not my story, but recently told to me by a guy working for the power company, and way too crazy not to share. He told us the story of his first day at work, which also happened to be his worst point. He went on a call to an elderly man's house because they were going to upgrade his meter and move it to the exterior of the home. It was in the basement at the time, which was normal at the time the house was built. The power company had attempted to contact the man, with no success via phone or mail. The power company decided to send the techs out and see if they couldn't speak to the man in person and get the meter moved/changed. When he arrived at the house with his boss, they immediately noticed a crazy amount of flies around the front door/porch and a god-awful smell. Anyone who has smelled a decomposing body knows it is an unforgettable smell. They called the police because they were convinced there was a dead body inside. A police officer arrives and immediately agrees with their assessment that there is likely a dead body inside, so the police officer opens the front door. It had been unlocked the whole time and yells in looking for a response. Nothing. They entered the home, following the police officer. The house was in pretty rough shape, but that is not uncommon when elderly people live alone. As they are searching the place looking for the resident, they come across a horrible scene in the basement. Not only do they find the elderly man's body, but the bodies of his 2 large dogs. The man had apparently died in his chair in the basement, where he sat for a while. The dogs, not having anyone to feed them, had eaten away his arms and legs up to the knees and elbows. In the process of doing this, the dogs had dragged the man's body across the floor, creating a trail of decomposition and bodily fluids from his chair across the floor. Now the dogs had survived for a while by eating the man and drinking water that was trickling near a humidifier. However, the water company had shut the water off due to non-payment, so the dogs ran out of water and died of dehydration in the basement as well. Their bodies were also starting to rot at the point they were discovered. All of this happened on the first day of this guy's job with the power company. I was lucky enough to see some photos the guy had on his phone, and it was just as bad as it sounds. Somehow this didn't deter the guy, who said he was with the power company for 5 years at the point he was telling us this story. Former property manager here. Here are some doozies that we found. Marijuana grow operation. The renters had blocked off a fairly large bedroom so that people visiting would not see that there was a room there. They had about 50 plants going in there. My company did not discover it. We saw the aftermath. False wall was ripped off. Shelves were cleared, but there was still reflective mylar along the walls, and hidden up in one of the highest shelves was a 1970s Polaroid of a naked woman, complete with 70s hairstyle and 70s pubes, a beehive. Not just a little one, it took up the inside of entire walls. You could hear the faking house humming when you entered. How people lived ignorant of this fact is beyond me, although it seemed that the entrance/exit areas for the bees were outside, not into the house. That could be how the exterminators came and killed the bees, but did not remove the hive. You could reach into the walls and pull out handfuls. Apparently this sort of thing can really start to smell after a while, but I have no idea what happened, because we sold off the business shortly thereafter, and were just managing it. We did not own these properties. The honorable mention goes to my spouse, who used to install refrigerators and other appliances for a rent-to-own company. He walked up to a second-story apartment. Houses are duplexes, but with the apartments being upper and lower, not side by side. He knocks on the upper door and hears laughing and splashing. It turns out that the renters had erected a fully functioning 4-foot by 12-foot swimming pool upstairs, and their kids and everyone's kids from the neighborhood were having a grand old time splishing and a splashing. I don't remember what happened after that, as I was not there, but could ask him, lol. Police officer. After briefing, I'm asked by my sergeant to accompany another officer to back yet another officer from the previous shift, who is still out on a well-being check. Well-being checks are pretty much what you expect. You haven't heard from so and so for a week and we go check on them point. So we show up at the residence, where we find two old ladies concerned for their friend whom they haven't talked to for a few days. The first shift officer, an old timer to us, steps back and lets us younger guys approach the house. Every other attempt to make contact has failed, so the sergeant told me to kick in the door as a monster. I'm expected to blast it open. As it was mostly glass, I tapped it with a foot and broke the older jam. It was rather anticlimactic, but my day was about to change. Point we enter. I'm on point with my partner behind me. The older officer falls in behind us. The first room is cluttered but nice. Looks cozy. The occupant of the home is obviously a musician, based on the decorations and books lying about. We enter the second room and freeze. The torso of an elderly woman is in the middle of the floor. Items are scattered about the room radiating from the point where she is located. Point after a pause that seemed like minutes, one of us says, "Where's her wheelchair?" The other replies, "Dude, where are her legs?" I reached out a hand to touch her, finding her cold to the touch even as the other officers radio for a medic. I key my microphone to tell them not to hurry and to ask for our supervisor and detectives. The rest of the residence is cleared without issue. All windows locked, all doors secured. Point. It turned out that the lady had fallen into the cold air return vent, like those found in older houses. The iron vent cover was on the floor a short distance away. Point. The poor lady had clawed and grabbed at anything she could, whether to put a phone to her or throw something to signal the next door occupant for assistance. Point. Over 10 years now, and that's still about the strangest damn thing I've walked into. When I was in primary school, I would go door to door to collect donations and sponsorship for the school walkathon. I'd often raise the most money in the class or my grade, but in year 6, age 10 over 11, I raised the most in the school. Point. I knocked on a door of a regular looking house in the street behind my grandma. The door flew open and smashes into the wall inside. I'm faced by a younger middle-aged man in a wife beater, with the craziest eyes I've ever seen, holding a baseball bat above his head. Point. My fight, flight or freeze response kicks in and it's freeze. Great. Get the fuck out to here, you parasitic SLUCHT. He yells at a 10-year-old boy. Then his face changes to horror. He lowers the bat and goes, "Oh shit, fat kid, I'm so sorry. I'm just having some trouble with someone. I thought you was them." Point. I Managed to tell him why I knocked on his door somehow. He makes me wait for ages while he searches the house and ends up giving me $50 in notes plus all the change he could find. Like 2 full handfuls. It was incredibly scary, but it was the biggest single donation in the whole school, which got me an extra prize. Dude I met once ran a flooring company. Worst one he ever had happened was when he showed up to some lady's house and got met at the door by a German shepherd, barking its head off at him. The encounter went as follows. Contractor will be C. Dog lady will be DL. C. Hi ma'am. I'm contracting guy, here to do an estimate on your floors. I'm gonna have to ask you to put your dog away before I come inside. DL. Oh no, he's fine. C. I'm not coming inside until you do something about the dog. So DL then struggles to drag her German shepherd into another room, with it barking the whole time. C comes inside, and within 15 seconds, the dog comes barreling around the corner, lunging at C, and trying to take a bite out of him. He pulls out of the way just in time as DL grabs her dog as it's trying to make another pass at him. C. Ma'am, please lock up your dog. DL. Oh, he wouldn't hurt a fly. Now at this point DL is struggling with her dog as it's trying to get at him. C is skeptical and doesn't believe her. C. Ma'am, lock up your dog. If he comes at me again I'm leaving. So DL drags her dog off again. C goes back to doing the estimate. About a minute later, the dog comes charging around the corner again, teeth bared. C barely jumps out of the way, hitting the dog away from him as he moves. Dog goes flying into the wall, breaks its neck and dies instantly. DL goes absolutely ballistic, screaming at him about how he killed her dog. She's calling the cops and he's going to jail, etc. C looks her dead in the eyes and says, "Call the police. I'll be in my car," and leaves. About 10 minutes later the police show up, go up the house, and talk to DL who's still in hysterics. After a bit, one of the officers comes out to C and says, "Sorry you had to deal with this. Go ahead and go home." He made a note of always telling people to have their pets locked up before he arrived after that. I'll post for my former apartment maintenance guy. My toilet just decided to start overflowing out of the blue. Flooded my bedroom and was starting to flow down the hallway when I noticed, and my roommate and I started damming it up with towels and bailing it out the front door. Being college students hitting the end of our days at all and having just blown down a few bowls, we decided to make a short film entitled Franken Toilet. We took chocolate syrup and wrote stuff like "Get Out" and "Abandon Hope" and "You Always Liked Making Stinks." Got our shots, edited it together with some footage from The Shining where the blood flows out of the elevator, but changed the coloring so it looked brown, all set to a tattooed yellow submarine. We finished our project and the cleanup, then disconnected the toilet in case it started going again before emailing the property management to send somebody by the next day. Dude shows up, spends maybe 30 seconds in there before saying he'll be back. Comes back with a couple police officers for some kind of welfare checkpoint. We forgot the chocolate sauce saying, "Get out" on the underside of the toilet lid. That and all my sheet I had just grabbed from my room so it wouldn't get wet and left piled around our main room made him think I was some hoarder or otherwise mentally unwell. We showed them the short we made and had a laugh afterwards, but he must have thought I was some sort of serious nut job. I used to clean houses, and the house that stands out for creepiest is the dollhouse. Normal, colonial in an affluent neighborhood. Walk in and it's a bit dated, but well maintained, and has a lot of high-end touches. The owner clearly had money and really good taste. A lot of antiques, beautiful artwork, great color scheme and flow from area to area. Chef's kitchen, etc. Then there was the front sitting room. This room had French doors to the main floor hallway/entranceway and an walk through to the main living area. It was dark. The color scheme didn't follow into that room. Everything was just old, not quality. And there were life-size dolls made of pantyhose of various skin tones, dressed in what is best described as someone's dead great-grandparents' wardrobe. Some had glasses, some had makeup on, and they were all posed in the room doing various activities. Old man at the piano, old lady knitting, 2 people playing chess. I was the only one willing to clean that room, and it was awkward to say the least. I felt compelled to apologize for moving the dolls to dust and vacuum underneath them. I asked my boss what the deal was. Never got that answer. I'm a property manager and took on a new property from another manager that was leaving the business. I've had some issues butting heads with this one tenant and decided it was time for a face-to-face. I'm guessing he's a 65 to 70-year-old grizzly old Vietnam vet. Seems to be over macho, but such is life. The house is dirty like I don't want to touch even a wall, and reeks of cigarette smoke. I head upstairs, bachelor pad bedroom, and a camera set up on his computer that shows 3 visible exterior locations and another I can't quite make out. Minding my own business and taking my litany of photos when I came eye level to the attached NSFW scene. This was the most interesting array I've walked into before, given the user and the fact that there's a dedicated camera assigned to the head of his bead. I've walked in on toys before, porn, and nudity, but this one took the cake. Once I went to a house to do an inspection for some remodeling work. I had called the customer in the morning and left a message letting him know when I was going to be there. He never called back, and when I got to his house of course no one answered. I called it in and was about to leave when a car pulls up. A lady, probably mid to late 30s, not bad looking, gets out and asks in a Eastern European accent if I was there to inspect the place. I say yes, and she tells me she's the owner's ex-girlfriend and he was in the hospital after a medical crisis. She tells me he told her about the appointment and that she has a key and lets me in to do my thing. After a minute or two of looking around I notice that he has a framed picture of the backside of a naked lady on the wall. Then I notice he has another picture of a naked woman sitting down spreading her legs. In fact, this guy had a ton of pictures of naked women on his walls. Then I realize that these are not pictures of naked women. These are pictures of a naked woman. A woman who is standing 6 feet from me. Needless to say, it was a little bit awkward. Sweet, I finally have a story to tell. Used to work for a metal recycling warehouse. One day, authorities call us from a city about an hour away asking us to come retrieve anything we think we can use from the house of a man who has killed himself. Apparently, this guy had failed to appear in court for child molestation or something along those lines, and the SWAT team showed up at his house. He offed himself in the kitchen as they were breaking in. So a couple coworkers and I go to the place to clean it out, and holy shit, it was fucking weird, man. Kids' toys everywhere. Closed TS full of unopened toys. Tons of blank tape. The basement was littered with radio transformers. There were a bunch of awards on the wall for some kind of big radio achievement. He also had a guitar signed by Jimmy Page and a bunch of other musical equipment. It was weird as fuck going into the house. So much weird energy there. I'll see if I can find the news story. Mine isn't terribly interesting, but I'll share. I was a handyman for a while. I was at a house early in the morning inspecting a frozen water line. I couldn't do anything about it at the time. Too cold out. So I was telling the tenant. As I'm wrapping up the conversation, who I assume is his wife, walks out of a bedroom in a thong and completely see-through shirt. I looked away quickly so I didn't look like a perv, and the opposite door opens and another woman walks out of the bathroom wrapped in a rather small towel. Like, if I had been sitting down, I'd have seen bush. I look the only way left to look, and around the corner in the living room walks another woman, wearing a see-through bra and the tightest pair of yoga shorts I've ever seen. Daddy, have you seen my charger? It's in my room. Says the first girl. Honey, does the sink work yet? Says the woman in the towel. I'm staring at the floor when it dawns on me that the landlord said this guy had a daughter in middle school and one in high school. I've damn near seen 2 girls under 16 naked and wondered about his wife's bush in a matter of 15 seconds. I finished up with keep the heater on in the kitchen. Have a good afternoon. Turned around and left. It was 9:30 AM. I stopped taking his landlord's calls after that. I'm in engineering and surveying. Sometimes you go into houses for investigations and or inspections. I have a few good ones. Typical rundown house outside with beat up cars and what looks to be an ice cream truck only fitting for a serial killer. Inside the house was brutal. Cardboard all over the floors, garbage everywhere. Refrigerator was in the living room. They had an outdoor fire pit next to old couches in the living room and they were burning pressure treated wood. Actually had to go into this basement which I don't even know how to describe. I was ready to find Buffalo Bill and a senator's daughter. Suffice to say I couldn't do the investigation due to the conditions of the house. We recommended they demo the entire house. The funny thing is that they had money to literally build a brand new amazing house. I can only imagine what it looks like now after 2 years. Another time I was doing an investigation in a crawl space and the family was upstairs. I could literally hear everything. I heard one of the kids playing piano and a lot of running around. Next thing I hear is the mother beating the shit out of one of her kids. These are pretty loud smacks. The kid started cursing and what sounded like him fighting back. The thing is I actually know the neighbors. Apparently cops are there constantly and the kid now likes to kill little animals. He will probably be on the news one day. I was a nurse aide and did home health for a while. Most of the time, the worst houses were pet houses. You know, people who have more than just one animal. That very distinct animal smell that pet owners swear up and down doesn't exist. Nah, you're just not so blind. But I can handle that point. I'm, obviously, not a fan of animals, so my boss always gave me a heads up whenever she was sending me to a house that had pets. So I get a new client to go care for, and she's like, yeah, they've got some dogs, cats, and birds. So I was really dreading it. The house was in the middle of nowhere, and it was a pretty small, shabby, slightly dirty house on the outside. When I went inside, I nearly broke my ankle. As soon as I stepped in, there was no floor. There was no foundation. I don't know how to describe this. Instead of wood/carpet/etc. flooring, there was nothing but dirt and the occasional wood pallet scattered about like a platform. All of the furniture and appliances were sitting on the dirt/mud. Holes in the roof plus RAIN. And my client was walking around, barefoot, in this. The animals were filthy. Everything was filthy. Never in my life have I seen something like that. I had to report it to my boss because it was so unhygienic. Not quite what you asked for, but the story is gold. House party. Bunch of teenagers drinking. One of them has a heart problem and starts to have chest pains and trouble breathing. So we called an ambulance. The guy's house is weird and you have to go up a bunch of steps to get to the front door, and it was dark out and slippy. There is however a basement room with a door, so we decide the best thing to do is let the paramedics in down there. Paramedics arrive and a couple of us rush downstairs to open the door and find two of our other friends in there, pissed as anything, watching Baba Station, like a call-in stripper TV show for those who don't know, and jerking off. Sat beside each other, cross-legged on the floor. There's no time to deal with it as we're in the midst of a medical emergency, so we just open the door and escort the paramedic in. He takes a quick look around and says, "You guys been drinking?" I take it. Worst thing is, we go upstairs. The paramedic checks my friend over and decides he's basically had a panic attack, but calls his parents anyway to come pick him up, etc. Must be a 25-minute event. We go back downstairs to let him back out, and the two guys are still down there, beating away at limp dicks. They saw a paramedic coming and see them jacking off. Didn't think to ask what's going on or hide their shame, just kept on going. One of them is a lawyer now, and the other works with kids. What a world. During college, I had a boss with rental properties. When business was slow, I would earn extra money by working on his rental properties. When a tenant moved out, the work was basic stuff like removing old carpets and installing new ones, spackle and paint where needed, do yard work etc. So, myself and a co-worker head out to one of his properties on a weekend to mow the lawn and do a general cleanup of the interior, plus take photos if the place was trashed. I wasn't inside the front door 10 seconds before I felt them. Since it was a particularly hot Georgia summer day, I opted to wear a t-shirt and workout shorts with my work boots. Jumping off the carpet and onto my paler's legs were hundreds of fleas. I could see them on the linoleum in the kitchen and on the baseboards of every room. Turns out the last tenant kept 9 dogs, and they vacated over a week ago. These faking monsters were starving, and they bit me everywhere. They were up my shorts and up my shirt having a feast. We bug bombed the absolute fuck out of the place and noped out. I had to drench myself with the hose to get them off, and I bug bombed my truck just in case. Fuck fleas. In high school I delivered home medical equipment and prescriptions for a pharmacy. One time I went to deliver some prescriptions to a house I had never been to. When I arrived I saw 20 or so people in the front yard grilling carne asada, drinking natural light, and looking at photo albums. I figured it was some kind of family reunion, so I walked up to the yard and told them I was delivering medicine for the name on the prescription label and needed someone to sign for it. They told me he was inside and to head on in. I wandered from person to person, asking if anyone could sign for his pills, repeating his name each time. Everyone kept referring me to someone else. Eventually I was referred to an elderly woman and told it was his wife. I told her I had medicine for her husband and needed someone to sign for it. She took me to a back bedroom and opened the door to reveal her husband, laying in his home hospital bed, dead as could be. Honey, he passed away last night. It wasn't a big deal, but several things have confused me about it ever since. First, why didn't the people on the lawn tell me that he had passed away? Why didn't anyone inside tell me that he had passed away? And most importantly, why did she feel the need to show me his dead body? She could have just told me he was dead. It's not like I would have called bullshit. I install cable for a living and so far, it's been a ride, let me tell you. I've been in hoarder houses, condemned cheat holes that are getting $300 a month in cable packages, but only have one air mattress in a house of 7 people. The worst place I've been though, well, it was something akin to a mass genocide, that is, if I were a cat. When I first knocked on the door a smell hit me in the face, a pungent chemical odor I couldn't place, but it was so severe my nose and eyes burned. As I finished up my work outside I had noticed the mummified remains of a cat next to the porch. It was still winter time, so I figured it had succumbed to the cold and the owner hadn't taken care of the body yet. This was not the case. Before I could enter the house, the owner had to lock a deranged dog up first, which took both the husband and wife to accomplish, because it was going berserk. And when I finally got in I figured out the smell. It was multiple brands and different scents of carpet fresh. It almost looked like snow in the living room. I could taste it in the air, it was so dense. I went into the basement to finish up, but another smell hit me. Beneath the smell of chemical death was the smell of putrid meat. Rotting corpse of any variety is a familiar scent, and if you whiff it once you'll never forget it. In the basement of the house were the scattered corpses of no less than 10 cats, all in various stages of decomposition, from skeletal remains to rigor mortis just setting in. The owner came down to assure me that they didn't kill the cats, but that they had all gotten sick at the same time and they couldn't afford 10 trips to the vet, so they never went, and all 10 cats had just recently died together. It was an interesting job. Both an EMT and a cable installer have to that could be considered the worst, one from each job. As an EMT in an area with a lot of farmland around I responded to a call for respiratory problems at one of the local farmhouses. We went out, and lady was standing out front ready to let us in. We have to walk through a seriously dark house to get to a back bedroom. While going through I noticed the amount of chicken feces in the house increasing, and that there was blood on the floor. My first thought was maybe the patient is more injured than was let on. Nope, their dog had got a hold of a chicken and was ripping it to shreds in the corner in the living room. This did not faze these people in the least. As a cable installer, got to a house that seemed normal enough, middle of a normal neighborhood and all that jazz. Get in and the people are foreign, not sure of nationality, so communication was tricky as their English was quite poor. Managed to get through what all I needed to do and where I would need to go throughout the house. Eventually it came down to I had to go into the basement, and they were insisting that I couldn't. Should have been my first clue. I told them that without going into the basement I couldn't do anything, since a different provider was hooked up, and their lines were home run down there. They relented. I wish they hadn't. There was human feces everywhere. There were just buckets of it, and it was just on the floor. The floor had a layer of urine. I don't know how I didn't smell it from the first floor, but I immediately gagged. The guy had a squeegee type mop to try and push stuff out of the way for me to cross the basement. I refused and had to get someone to explain we wouldn't do anything until they cleaned it up. Next up was the rotting dog underneath the trailer home. Strangest would be painting of a vagina on this woman's apartment wall along with a poster that looked like it had been drawn in crayon depicting her as what looked like Ursula. Captioned with "I'm a god and some form of 9/11 scenario." Weirdest scenario I had to deal with as an EMT was having to transport a delusional woman who had walked several miles to a hospital because she believed she was 8.5 months pregnant and needed an emergency C-section. Wasn't pregnant, but was apparently very hungry since she had bought 20 pounds of frozen chicken wings on her way to the hospital. The best we could understand is she honestly believed that after this C-section she would walk back home with her baby and the chicken wings to cook up some dinner. The hospital confiscated the chicken and she did not want to go with us, but in her deteriorated mental state she had been 302'D prior to our arrival. On the way to the facility she went into detail about being bit on the head by aliens while working for NASA when she was 12 to 13 and being drafted by the German army as an American and deployed to Iraq where she had her head chopped off and a grenade shoved in her throat that they shot with shotgun to detonate it. She says it was okay though, since she had surgery to fix it all. I'm gonna rattle off a few. A guy who had literally tens of thousands of hand-powered drills hanging from the basement ceiling, many hoarders, the level where you literally cannot see the floor. I have a video on my work phone, if anyone is interested. People with large quantities of dogs/cats, and basically give them an entire floor to use as a bathroom. Yes, I've reported many people. One house where, when I moved his modem, cockroaches went everywhere. Said to the guy, just got to grab something from my truck. Packed up my sheet and bailed. No joke. I literally witnessed a Haitian mother of 6 either sell drugs or trick herself out while her 6 children, husband, brother and husband's friend sat in the living room. At this same house, when the husband's friend showed up, I heard him say, "Who wants it?" And everyone in the living room just went ballistic cheering and sheet. I walk into the room, and what do I see? Him doing a t-shirt toss with a bag of faking cheaters. So many crackheads, heroin addicts, mentally ill people living on their own, etc. Living in truly horrifying conditions. I have a few specific houses that will forever stick with me if anyone wants a very detailed retelling. This might get buried, but I have a story that is neither from a maintenance guy nor about a rancid smell. When I was in med school in the Netherlands, I had a job as a caregiver/basic nurse. This meant helping elderly and infirm with their daily activities, showering and medication. I got a schedule, and I drove up to people's homes. Now this area is pretty significant historically, as it was heavily fought over during World War II, and after the war, some infamous former Nazis and Dutch Nazi Party members lived nearby. 70 years later, I entered a lady's home. Usually I'm not one of the first people inside, but this time I was. I had read the files beforehand, which said she had dementia and needed some help. It also contained the cryptic note, "Doesn't even remember what happened in the Second World War." Which is an odd thing to note. Usually you would remark someone not recognizing children or not knowing the season, etc. So I met this nice, sweet lady who kept up a facade of normalcy as people with dementia often do. Everything went as planned until I entered her bedroom. On the wall, opposite the bed was a very large painting, looked like oil paint, definitely not a printout, of a Germanic warrior holding a lance with a swastika flag wrapped around it, gloriously on a mountain top. When I went to get hearing aids, there were some very old Nazi magazines in the drawer. I finished my job, but later told my supervisor about this, and that I wasn't comfortable working with her like this. I considered demanding that she replaced the painting, but the situation resolved itself when she worsened quickly and was admitted to a nursing home. In high school I was doing a summer job stripping down buildings for renovation. Remove second ceilings, wallpapers, and leftover furniture. Strip the building down to its stone fountains basically. Got a call for a new job. An elderly man living alone had died, and his kids just wanted to be rid of the house and everything in it, so they sold it at a bargain price. Living alone, and being somewhat estranged with his kids, his death wasn't really noticed for a couple of days, so over the entire house hung a sickly, sweet smell of decay. To make matters worse, he had 3 dogs and 5 cats that he couldn't really care for any longer. Feces everywhere. Under the bed, on cupboards, even under the floorboards. The couch was covered in a thick layer of fur. Apparently he didn't ever open the windows either. The wallpaper was moldy along with most other wooden/organic things. The smell was so bad the first day we arrived we immediately left to buy an entire supermarket's supply of vinegar concentrate and spread it around the house, ripped open all doors and windows, and waited outside the building for half an hour. The smell returned every morning just as strong, and it was a real test of will not to throw up every morning and you just entering the house to throw open the windows, flip it around, and I got a good 1 point. My city's utility company will come by and do a free home energy audit to help you make things more efficient and less costly. Clearly I wasn't thinking when I scheduled and quickly forgot about an appointment for November 1st. Tied one on pretty good that Halloween. I'd put some considerable effort into a Tokata inspired Mad Maximum-ish get up, which I drunkenly dissembled on the living room following the festivities. This guy shows up at about 8 in the morning and wakes me up when he knocks. I get up to answer, surely looking every bit as hungover as I felt, and invite him in. My front door opens right into the living room, so the first thing he would have seen, after my blotted as, was a coffee table covered in metal chains and 2 baby doll heads with their eyes gouged out, attached to wooden poles. In my stupor, I didn't realize this until after he left. He was a very friendly and helpful, but I can only imagine he was probably really weirded out by that. I work for a company that owns hundreds of rentals in a SEC college town. We are the crew that comes in and makes repairs to your house/apartment. We also come in after you move to prepare for the next tenant. I've seen some shit. I've had college girls open the door in towels that reveal everything. I've been led through the house and by a bathroom where the door is open and a college girl is taking a shower with a clear shower curtain. I've seen wanton destruction of property in some of the nastiest shit you could imagine. However, I have 2 different situations out of all of them that leap to the front of my mind. The shrine to Born and coffee in the hot cheerleader. The hot cheerleader wins because she was a hot cheerleader. She and her roommates got evicted for whatever reason. That's not relevant to the story. I saw her multiple times for a couple of years because she had a crush on one of my co-workers. If she heard us in the neighborhood she would come out to flirt. She would show off by doing upside down splits and all kinds of gymnastics. Did I mention she is smoking hot? Fast forward to us cleaning and repairing the unit. We went in her room and found a slew of interesting stuff, including multiple sex toys, whips, outfits including a schoolgirl outfit and an orange jumpsuit short set with fake handcuffs around the waist, several pipes and bongs, explicit pictures. Several hundred empty whippet containers, powdery residue, marijuana seeds and flakes, blah blah blah. A letter from Ole Miss expelling her for failing every class. No clue why she failed though. Just a thought. I have 2 kids going off to college next month and another next year. I'm a concerned dad to say the least.